All right, we should now be live. Let's just make sure that this is all working, and I'll just spread the word to everyone. So yeah, in this stream, we are going to go through a lot of various questions, and we're going to be sculpting a little character, which is going to be a lot of fun. So Morten is going to be dealing with a lot of various questions, while I'm going to be sculpting. Just give us a little bit of time, a few seconds, just to we can push this out on our social media as well.
Oh, we already have like 30 people watching.
Awesome.
Damn. The power of scheduling a live stream.
Yes.
So what's the inspiration for today's sculpt, Henning?
It's actually Rex from Mass Effect.
Oh, I was just when you sent the picture, I was like, you know what? Maybe if I'm gonna sculpt an alien, maybe I should do Rex from Mass Effect.
Well, you can do that next time.
I'll do Rex or something similar.
Yeah, no, that's going to be really cool. So now I've posted that, so people should be able to find the stream. Let's just double check that.
Double check.
Yeah, let's just double check that. Yeah, so we're just celebrating our Black Friday sale and having a nice little stream for that. Yeah, it's live. And we're going to be doing this every single day this week, which is going to be tons of fun. And now Morten and I have set up some nice little cameras, which is nice. So it's hopefully going to be a bit more personal than just having our voices in the background and some monsters popping up.
Let's see how long it takes before I turn into Tiny Morten today.
Yeah, Morten turned into Tiny Morten yesterday. So always good fun. All right, just posting this as an Instagram story as well. Such millennials. We need to update our Instagram stories, our social medias. Yeah, stream will start in we'll start with actual sculpting in just like 30 seconds or something from now. Yeah, so basically just give us a just come with the questions, whatever questions you guys have. This is around general industry or about like career, like anything you want. Just scream out and we'll do the best we can to answer them. And while
nature,
life, nature, all that, anything you want.
Yeah, yesterday's stream was a lot of fun. It's been a long time since we were both in a stream.
Yeah, I think we did it Black Friday 2020, 2021 or 2020. Yeah.
Was that in Japan?
No, that was in Denmark.
Okay.
Yeah. And then 2020 we were in Japan.
Crazy.
Yeah, crazy times. It's insane how time flies now. All right, I'm going to start some actual sculpting now. So I have my reference on my left monitor, and Morten will be managing questions. I'll also just have it open as well.
Not so much a question, just a statement from Carlos saying, "Hey guys, your tutorials are the best." I'll take that.
I'll take that as well.
It's a great way to start the stream. If we could just keep that going, that'll be fine. That makes my life very easy.
All right, so whenever I start sculpting like this, I have some general references on my next monitor. And I'm just going through and starting off with just getting some small little landmarks, just like the eyes, and it's gonna have a little bit of a nose as well, a little bit of a mouth, and not taking it too seriously at this point, really just like blocking in some stuff. If you watched yesterday's stream, there's going to be, or we talked a little bit about how you have like the design and the anatomy and how they play together. And at this point, I'm kind of just working a little bit on both. Like I'm getting in some general bony landmarks, but also I'm getting in some core anatomy as well, just some quick cheekbones. But I'm not necessarily blocking them in like perfectly to the point where like I'm not actually blocking in the skull and blocking in all the different things, though that's something I highly recommend you to do if you're more fresh to sculpting. But now I'm focusing more on actually creating more of a cool design instead of the actual process. Though of course, if I want to make this the coolest thing it could be, I would absolutely use a base mesh, because sculpting from a sphere like this, just straight up a sphere, pretty hard to do.
I have a question from Dan who asks, do you make good money as an artist? Yeah, some do, some don't. It's there's like highs and lows in every industry. Some people are better than others at marketing themselves, and it's a very hard question to like give a definitive answer to.
One thing we can actually say there, though, is that a lot of people assume that you have this like whole starving artist thing, but there is actually a lot of money in the industry. Like depending how like what level you're at and what company you're at and what country, of course, all these things matter. But like if you're like a senior game artist or a senior VFX artist, you're nowhere near the starving artist. You're living quite a comfortable life. Though you might often have to reside in a major city, which is obviously much more expensive than a smaller one. But it's not like you're living like on noodles or something if you've been working for a few years.
All your money goes to rent.
Yes.
Either way, so that's.
So I'm just trying to play around with the design. Like it's really hard to talk and play around with the design, so I'll let Morten do a bit of the talking. But basically I'm just starting off with just having some overall landmarks like the eyes, and then I'm just kind of pushing them to the side, trying to make them wide or trying to make them really like narrow. This is one of the cool things about ZBrush, is that you can really just play around with this. It's super intuitive to play around with this.
How to practice anatomy? Oh, that's a big question. Yes. Anatomy it's like an endless book, where in the beginning you read a bunch of pages and you feel like you're making a lot of progress. So right in the beginning you might see a lot of progress, and then it sort of like slowly just tapers off, slowly tapers off, and slowly tapers off. In terms of how to practice it is just a lot of practice, breaking down different areas of the body into more manageable chunks. Instead of thinking of it as the human body, start thinking of it as chunks of the body that you have to sort of not master but get familiar with, and slowly start to piece those puzzles together. We actually have a course by Christian on FlippedNormals called Anatomy for Sculptors. I'll see if I can.
I have it up here as well.
Which is a phenomenal course, as it's not, even though Christian uses ZBrush to show the sculpt in, it's kind of irrelevant, the software that he's using. His technique and his way of teaching anatomy is really easy to digest, regardless if you're a beginner or an advanced artist, I would say. It's probably one of the best courses on anatomy, especially for 3D sculptors. On the market, I think.
It also depends on what you mean by anatomy, because I think there's a lot of confusion as to what anatomy is, or really rather what you need to know. Because you might assume that anatomy is just understanding every single muscle, but maybe that's what you think you need to learn. But depending on what your goal is, maybe instead you want to just be good at making characters. And of course, if you want to make characters, you need to have a good understanding of the various muscles. But there is so much more than that. Meaning, what I'm trying to say is, if you're good at the technical muscles, if you know all the muscles in the body, that does not mean that you're a sculptor, like whatsoever. That's a very technical thing. It means that you can memorize the names and the origin, insertion, all that kind of stuff. But then you have a whole different area of sculpting, which is understanding the shape and appeal, gesture, all these kind of things. That's more abstract in a sense, that the shape, like being able to create good shape, is something you can do on a sphere, and you can just do something random and it's just going to look kind of appealing, even though it doesn't look like correct anatomy. So it's a figuring out exactly what you want to actually learn.
Yeah, it's almost like two separate disciplines in a way. At some point they will overlap, but having technical anatomy knowledge and having the knowledge of how to sculpt, form, and anatomy, two different things. I was more in the technical camp right when I started out, because I thought that learning the names, insertion points, and all of that would make me good at anatomy. And if there are any detectives out there, you might be able to find a thread on the good old ZBrush form of me being an absolute cunt because I thought I had mastered anatomy just by knowing the names and all the technical things about anatomy.
Yeah, the way I like to think about it in terms of like anatomy is that I'm not sure if anyone has used this analogy before, but like my way of thinking about it is that it's like knowing a city, where knowing a city, it means that you know where the coffee shops are, and you understand the vibe of the city, and generally you just understand intuitively what the city is about. And understanding technical or knowing technical anatomical names is like memorizing the street names, which means you can not have been to a city whatsoever. Sorry about that. And you can understand the you can not have been to the city at all, but you can understand or know the street names perfectly. But you don't know the actual city, or you can do the opposite. You've lived in a city your entire life, but you don't know any street names. That's like me in my hometown in Bergen. I know the city quite well. I don't know any street names, but like I understand the city. I can give the vibe for that. It's the same thing with sculpting. You have people who know the technical names really, really well, and they can't sculpt. And then you have people who can sculpt really well, but they don't know the technical names. So it's more about figuring out what your end goal is when it comes to sculpting.
A question, which is, do you ever do something like sculpting a hand and then just save it so you don't always have to sculpt it from scratch? Yep, all the time. Cheat in quotation marks as much as you can. Save yourself the work. I would say as you start to get more and more advanced, as you get a better and deeper understanding of things, you can start to cheat more and more. In the beginning, you definitely want to develop that solid understanding of things. So it's like, don't just take a base mesh hand and then always stick that on there because you can't actually sculpt the hand, but because you know it'll speed up your workflow and ultimately, you'll be able to produce better and faster art.
Get good at sculpting first, and then you can optimize it. Being able to make something faster just means you'll get to like a crappy result faster, unless you know how to do it. But if you know how to properly sculpt a hand, it's like then you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Then it's more just about, yeah, you've done the hand, move on to something more important. Because also something like hands are basically the same for all people. Like there are some, of course, some slight proportional differences and such, but like there isn't that much difference between hands. Same thing with teeth as well. Like just make a set of teeth and just reuse them over and over again, because you have things like that, like the teeth and hands and such, that take an insane amount of time to actually build. But it's not that important that you do a unique thing every single time. It means that you're spending all your time budget on those areas instead of spending your time budget on more important things like making the face and the eyes more unique.
Yeah, take the course that I did not too long ago, where we create a full character in ZBrush that's Dark Souls inspired. I just started from one of the base meshes that comes with ZBrush, because the whole idea of the course wasn't for you to be able to sculpt something like that from the ground up. It was being able to concept a creature, a monster, not in a super fast way, but get up to a decent result fairly quickly. And for that, we don't need to start from a sphere. We might as well start from a base mesh that has the correct proportions. And then, well, it doesn't have the correct proportions, but it has normal human proportions that we can then tweak. So we don't have to spend 3 or 4 hours getting to that point in the beginning. So it's, evaluate what you need for the type of work that you're doing.
Probably would have taken you a lot longer to make that if you hadn't started with base. And it's about what is that you want to achieve. Do you want to learn a lot? Then start from like a sphere, like I'm doing here. This is just straight up from a sphere in Dynamesh. Or if you want to have the final result be super sexy, then start with base meshes, or like do what Morten said, like cheat in quotation marks as much as you can. Like don't actually cheat, like don't actually steal and do unethical things, but do things that it may feel a bit weird in the beginning, like, oh, I can just reuse a model. I don't have to retopologize everything from scratch.
Yeah. I feel like we should almost like make a video about all of these things, because I'm seeing from yesterday and today, there are a lot of the same types of questions that pop up. Maybe good to have like just a dedicated video on the channel that just answers the most
Yeah,
asked questions in CG or whatever.
it's a pretty good idea. Your top CG questions answer, or like a CG FAQ or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Everyone will have these questions. Let's just answer them. Is it wrong to use a base mesh? Should I use a triangle's bad? Are n-gons bad?
And like all the answers will be, well, it depends.
Yeah, the more you
Um,
learn, the more high level artists you ask, the more the answer is going to be it depends. If you're asking somebody who's like who's been doing CG for 2 months and they've had lectures on 3D modeling, hey, should I use triangles? They're like, you never ever use triangles. You do somebody who's been doing it for like a year, you're like, yeah, you can use it a few times here and there. And then you ask somebody who's been doing it for 5 years, 6 years, they're like, well, that just entirely depends on the use case.
we have a question from, I believe this was a viewer from yesterday as well. Which Wacom product do you recommend for sculpting, the touchpad or the painting screen ones? So, you've got two types. You've got the graphic tablets that just like the normal Wacom Intuos, and then you've got the screen tablets where you do it on the screen. And again, it depends. Like we talked about yesterday, there are trade-offs with both, right? If you take the normal graphic tablet where you sit sort of more straight up and down, and there's a disconnect between you're sculpting
That's
on
what
a
I'm doing
pad
now.
and it's sort of translating to the screen. It's not as immediate, I would say, but your hand doesn't get in the way. And I think in general you're able to have a healthier posture over longer periods of time. But with the screen tablet, for instance, it's 1-to-1. You sit there, and where you put your cursor is, where you're sculpting, and you can see exactly what you're doing. So for precision, I think you can't match the precision of a screen tablet with a graphic tablet, for example. But at least for me, I find it harder to be more ergonomic in the way that I work, and that's sort of the trade-off I feel.
Also, a screen tablet is significantly more expensive as well. While
There's that.
something like
Takes up a lot of space.
takes up a lot of space. So yeah, like I'm using straight up a pen tablet now, and that's something like $200-300, and a display tablet would be double that, like easily. Though they have got a lot more expensive or cheaper recently due to like the Chinese companies entering the scene, like XP Pen and Huion and such, where before there was only the Wacom. It was only the Wacom Cintiq, and they were very expensive. And now, luckily, there's been some disruption in that space, because my God, those tablets were expensive, guys, and they were good, but expensive.
We have a question here. I'm curious about that. I'm not sure I can fully answer, but it's related to our anatomy course. Oh, I have something in my throat. Oh, one sec. Oh, I should really have brought like a glass of water.
Rookie mistake.
So, is our course as good as Scott Eden's course? So I took Scott Eden's course many, many years ago, and that wasn't the sculpting course. I'm assuming he has a sculpting related course, but this was his anatomy course. Um, and it sort of overlaps a little bit in terms of the way that Christian he teaches. And one of the things I think is nice about Christian's course is that you get the best of both worlds. You get both some of the technical anatomical knowledge. We don't spend too much time on that because it's so focused on form and so focused on how do we translate that into sculpting, into an actual 3D mesh. In that way, I would say it's a better course. It's more solid because it'll give you a faster, time to, from start to finish kind of thing, where you'll actually get into sculpting and you'll be able to utilize it fairly quickly.
Yeah, it's a bit hard to compare as well, because Scott's is like 7 weeks. It's obviously a longer one. It's also like they complement each other quite well. What Christian's course is doing, also like the one I have here as well, Introduction to Sculpting, it doesn't cover so much like the technical anatomy. It covers more like how to think about things, like gesture and appeal and all these kind of things. So it's where, like, for instance, if you're sculpting a face here, it is more about observation than it is about knowing exact technical anatomy. So you can sculpt a pretty convincing face without knowing all the muscles of the face, for instance. So it's a lot about those things as well. Of course, you need to know anatomy at some point as well. What I'm doing now with the sculpting, by the way, is I was reaching a point where the design was getting kind of cool, but there were so many messy brush strokes there. So what I'm doing, I'm using a brush called Smooth Stronger. This is super cool. Hit the comma key, go to Lightbox, and then go to Brush, and then you go to Smooth, which is here somewhere. I found it before. Anyway, you do that, and then you just double-click Smooth Stronger, and this just allows you to smooth in a much stronger way. It just like nukes everything you have. The way I'm using it, if I can just figure out if Epic Pen will want to work now. There we go, cool. So what I'm doing is, if I have a shape that goes like, let's say the shape is like this, what I'll do is I'm going to like work within the shape and like kind of smooth out within the shape so that I leave the borders untouched, meaning that I'm using this actually as a sculpting tool and not just as a smoothing tool. So it means that I get to like simplify the model significantly, simplify the planes down, because particularly at this early stage, you're just going to add a lot of junk to your model. You're just experimenting, and there's going to be tons of planes that might look cool because they're just like texture from the brush and such, but you just have to kill your darlings here. You just have to go in and just destroy the shape you have, just so that the shape will get stronger, and then you can add all that kind of stuff back later on. But at this point, you need good clean shapes. You can of course just go through this just with the clay brushes as well, and all sorts of different brushes. There's no like one way to do this, but I find that the Smooth Stronger is fantastic. If you've been watching some of our other videos, we're like very much don't use the smooth brush, but basically what that means is don't do this. Just don't smooth just around like crazy. Don't destroy your forms. This is more simplify your forms, and that's what I'm doing now. You could of course do this with trim dynamic as well. You can, for instance, hold on a shift key. This is a thing a lot of people don't know in ZBrush. You can hold on a shift key, and the shift key isn't a smooth brush. The shift key is just another brush, so you can replace that with anything. You can hold on a shift key and click here, and you can use that to like the blob brush, for instance. So whenever I have the shift key now, it's going to be the blob brush. So it can be the smooth brush, but also cannot be the smooth brush. So in this case, we just replace it with Smooth Stronger, which is quite handy. And then I'm just using the clay billet brush with alpha 06, and that's a really solid alpha for getting in a lot of specificity. While if you have, for instance, the default one, alpha 28, I believe it is, then you get a lot of texture, and it's a bit too textured. And if you remove it, then there's too little texture for me. So I found that the alpha 06 is fantastic.
I have an interesting question from Axel. He's asking, as a teacher, how do you get feedback or give feedback to students without discouraging them? Well, I think it's important to note there that your job as a teacher, right, is to try and help them overcome the struggles that they have. So, you know, you don't, like, if what they're working on is like, that's bad work, right? You don't tell them it's bad. You figure out a way together how they can actually improve what they have. So like maybe they're sculpting a face, but they're doing it wrong, or it looks completely off. You look at it within the confines or within the constraints that they're able to work. You figure out a way where they can actually improve on their work. Instead of saying it's bad, start over, have to give constructive feedback. I think that's one of the key parts to all of this, is that there always has to be something that they can improve upon, not just like, well, fix it or just make it better. Especially with really advanced topics like, say, anatomy, it's almost impossible for someone who is new to it or who's a student to just take feedback that is just fix it or just make it better. They need a lot of guidance in how to do that. And I think the best way to do it is to do it in a not a 100% direct way. Go like, okay, your delts like here, they're not how they're supposed to be. Do it like this instead of giving them the formula for how to fix it. So to teach them how to investigate so they can start fixing things for themselves, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I find it also useful sometimes just to do sculpt overs. That's what I do whenever I have my mentee students, where I just go through it. But what I'm doing is a little bit of theory. Is if they're starting off here and they need to like go up here. I know you can't see this yet, Morten, but Trust me,
No,
there's a point. There is a ladder on the screen. So
15-second delay.
Yes. So if they're starting off here at the bottom and they want to go all the way up here, and let's say like this is a beginner level, and the end is the level where it's like Riot quality or like Blizzard quality or something like that. And let's say you can do that as a teacher, you can bring it all the way up there. It's too much. Then that would be like one leap. That would be like one giant leap for them to go up there, and that's impossible. So what you need to do is not make sure that the model looks or the work looks as good as possible. You have to do something that genuinely helps them, and that might just be take it to the next level. So for instance, what I'm doing with a lot of my students, there might be actually be somebody watching right now. If so, hello. It's like, okay, let's just observe the bones. The only thing we're going to focus on this lesson is going to be looking at the bones. Don't care about anything else. We're not going to go into the specific shape of the eye or anything like that, just the bones. It's also because information overload is very real. So if you were to take their character and explain absolutely everything that's wrong and how to fix it, first it would take like 8 hours to do, but also they just wouldn't be able to pick it up just because there's too much going on. I had this when I was learning languages as well. Like Morten and I were trying to learn like Japanese and Chinese quite seriously some years ago, and basically if somebody says a word to you and you're like, oh cool, I have to write it down, put it in my flashcard deck and all that, and you need some time just to internalize it. If somebody were to just tell you 10 words, you're not going to learn 10 words. You are going to learn 0 words because it's just going to go over your head. You're just going to be able to process it. So it's really about figuring out exactly what level the student is at and then just taking it to the next level, telling them what the next step is. It might be helpful sometimes to like just go all the way and like show them, okay, this is how you actually take it to the final level. But it's equivalent in like weightlifting or something. Let's say you're trying to like deadlift, the end goal is to deadlift 250 kilos, but they can only lift like 50 kilos. It doesn't matter if you show them how to lift the 200 kilos or whatever, because they just won't be able to do it no matter how hard they try. It's just not possible. Instead, show them how they can increase the weight a little bit and how they can do it in like a good and safe way, and they can reproduce that over and over again. And then you have to be aware when you give feedback, not just as a teacher, but like in general, that some people are very they have a lot of ego in it, in the sense that if you give them feedback, they think that the feedback is given to them instead of about the work. So they might be very sensitive towards that. You know, that's just how it is. Some people are just like that. Ideally, you remove the ego from the equation, but that's just not possible at all times, particularly if you're dealing with like first-year students and such who's getting feedback for the first time in their lives. So at that point, you just have to, like if you watched if you watched Interstellar, you have Tars, the robot there, and he's like honesty level 90%. So I tried to kind of like give the honesty level, and I sometimes straight up just ask them, what honesty level do you prefer? And they're like, well, you have to be a little bit nice to me, because that's what I respond.
How much do you want me to destroy?
Yeah, basically, like I have a current mentee student who's just like, just destroy me as much as possible, just like don't hold back whatsoever, which is you know, fantastic, because that means that you are going to improve more that way. If you're if we have to be more gentle, then it's a case that you might have to, the truth may not come out in as effective as possible. But if that's just the way the person responds to things, that's just the way you have to react or do it. Because if somebody is a very gentle person and they don't deal well with just being like destroyed or, you know, like everything being pointed out, then they're just not going to learn anything. Like I think when Morten and I were learning, still learning of course, but like in uni, I think we were just like, just destroy me, just like point out everything that's wrong and I'll just fix it all. And that meant that we improved quite fast. But it's just a case that not everyone is wired like that, and that's absolutely understandable. Figure out what level, figure out what way people receive feedback and work with that.
We have a question. What dynamics resolution is the best for blocking out a face and adding landmarks in ZBrush? Literally impossible to answer because it's based on scale. So for some people it could be 32, for others it could be 1024. The key there is that it should be low res. There isn't a specific resolution, but it should be low res. I mean, you shouldn't, the way that I like to do it, because I have no self-control, is I force myself to stay in a low res mesh for longer than is probably necessary, because I don't know, I just lack the self-control to not create details if I have the ability to. So I'll try to keep it low res for longer to really force myself to not focus on any details that I don't need to at that stage.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. In terms of resolution, basically, like, there isn't like a perfect resolution because right now I'm just doing a bust. But if this was a whole body, then the resolution would be completely different. But basically, keep it as low poly as you possibly can while still being able to get in the details you want to have. Like I'm a bit higher poly than I probably should be. I'm around 300, well, exactly 300,000 points now. And this means that I do get in a lot of brush strokes, which is cool, but it's also bad because you don't want brush strokes. I have to go in and like I have to smooth things out. But if this was like at like 100,000 or 50,000, that means that you can't have brush strokes. Like it's just not feasible because you don't have that resolution.
Let's see. Spacey's asking if it's only sculpting questions or he can ask personal ones. You are free to ask any question you want, but we might not answer.
Yeah, it's more about like just doing a general Q&A, like industry or jobs or anything like that. You know, try to keep it related to CG to some degree. But you know, feel free to just go for it. Here's actually an interesting one. How high is the poly count usually when you do such detailed density models in cinematic CG work? This is interesting. Let me draw. Because again, Morten will not be able to see this, but in whenever you do anything like cinematic or for games or anything like that, you have like different levels of detail. So you might have the lowest one, which is like pure like which is just like it might be called LOD 0 or LOD A or LOD Z, whatever. And different companies have different naming conventions. But this is just a pure anim or pure like roto mesh, which is insanely low res. And then you, at least it's low res, so it's real time. And then you might have something that's being used for effects, or you might have something that's being used for the for like general simming and all that. You know, it's kind of the same thing. And then you have like your general render mesh, which is actually being rendered, and then you might have like a sculpting mesh on top. So it kind of depends on what level you're at this one, and also depends entirely on how you're sculpting it as well, or how you're detailing it. Because in a case like this guy here would have a lot of details. Maybe he would have like tiny scales and such. So you could do that either in ZBrush, where you actually sculpt it, or you could do it in Paint or Mari, where you don't sculpt, or where you do it in texturing, which means the resolution is going to be completely different based on what you choose there. So if you decide to do that in Painter, you can get away with, let's say it's like 15 million polys or something for the head, which is, you know, it's all right resolution. Depends entirely on the character, or if you're doing it in all of the pores and everything in ZBrush, you need like 100 mil. Like, it just depends entirely on it. There's going to be a theme here, like you were talking before. Morten mentioned that it depends. It's going to be just a case of this, and it's just because it does depend. You can't say like, yeah, character for cinematic is 60,000 polys. Be aware of anyone who says something with really high confidence when it comes to these kind of things, because usually there's a lot more shades of gray than just there is a specific number for it.
Like that goes for anything in life.
Yeah,
basically.
I think so. That's what we're trying to do as well when we do our tutorials, that this is not the way to do it. This is a way to do it. Same thing what I'm sculpting now, my preferred way of working, same if we do like the intro to sculpting course and all that. It's a way of doing it, and it's one way of thinking about it, but it's not the way. There isn't the way of doing it, because we're just trying to make characters out of clay, meaning there isn't like a proper way of doing that, because it's not like a law of nature or something. It's just something we're kind of making up as we go along.
Someone is asking if we could do a tutorial on how to sculpt feet. There aren't really that many videos online for it. I'm struggling with that. Sure.
That's a good question.
We could do a feet video. It's an interesting one, right? Because like the whole sculpting a specific thing is very much something that as you start to get better and better, you start to rely less and less on, because instead of viewing, and that's kind of what I want people to try and do as they get better and better at sculpting, is it's not so much about sculpting a specific object, but rather how you think about sculpting. And so the goal really with sculpting or anything creative, whether it's drawing or painting, is being able to draw on your past experiences and then create that form regardless of kind of what it is. That being said, yes, we can definitely do a video on how to sculpt feet.
Yeah, it's a case where you have to know some specific anatomy, no matter what you're sculpting, is feet or hands or the rib cage or anything like that. There are some specific things you just have to know, just some purely technical pieces of detail. Where does the pec insert and what muscles do you have there? But then the bigger thing is that you need just to have a good sense of observation, so that if you were to take somebody who, let's say you had like Bernini or somebody, and he was transported to an alien planet where people have a different set of anatomy, like they don't have the same muscles. He would be able to sculpt them beautifully in like a day, even though he wouldn't technically know the anatomy, just because he would have such a strong sense of form and design and all that. Of course, if he were to understand their anatomy, he would be able to do a better job. But just because because he has such a strong sense of sculpture, you would just be able to do it a lot quicker. And that's really the point about this. It's not just about being able to sculpt feet. It's about getting a set of tools that you can use to sculpt anything. What are your general thoughts on CGMA courses? I haven't taken any one of their courses myself, but we've actually hired some of the teachers who's been teaching at CGMA, and they've been of really high quality. I believe that the latest one was Ben Aird. I think he taught a CGMA course. They seem to be solid courses. I heard a lot of good things about them. Can't vouch for them personally. Obviously, we're biased, and we both think, that you should buy FlippedNormals courses instead, but there's definite value in these courses. The cool thing about those courses is that they're much longer. Like they're not really comparable directly, because they go over several weeks, while the courses you buy from FlippedNormals, they're courses that it might be like 8 to 10 hours long, and you take them at your own time.
There's one was asking, are courses worth the money, or should I stick to YouTube videos? It depends. Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. There are a lot of really great free resources online, especially on YouTube. But the same thing, you can say that about courses. It's if there's something specific that you're looking to learn, and you find it harder to try and stitch it together from a bunch of different free resources on YouTube, but you know that there's one dedicated video or tutorial that you can buy from somewhere. If you have the money, I would buy that, just because the time you save in trying to figure everything out by yourself can be greatly offset by just buying that course and watching,
I have a perfect example of that.
3-4 hour course there.
Here's I'm going to find a perfect example of this. Let's see here. We have we'll just open this up. Switching to Blender for experienced artists. I think this is actually a great example of that. If you have something like sculpting, that's a bit more like a deep fundamental thing that you just have to learn and drill over and over and over again. Well, this is like a technical thing. You want to learn Blender and you already know 3D software, then you have to Google a lot. Like, in order to actually get started with Blender, you could do this 100% without this course, but it's going to take you like a few weeks of Googling and forum threads and asking tons of questions. Well, here we've already digested it for you. We've already gone through what you need to know, because we went through the pain of switching to Blender. So then we made a course for people who want to just switch around. The problem is, if you switch into Blender, you're going to go through a lot of beginner tutorials, which, great if you're a beginner. But if you've been doing CG for 10 years and you want to get started with Blender, you don't need to understand how to install Blender, or how to, you need to know, okay, how do I navigate? Where are all my hotkeys and all that? So that's really what we're doing here. So if you were to get a course like that, currently 50% off, so it's $30, this would save you so much time, just to get started, and it would serve as a guide. So for instance, let's say you would spend like a few weeks just to get up to the level of learning Blender, or you can just do this by yourself, or you could just get the course for $30. It's like so much easier to just get a course where it's pre-digested. But that, of course, means that the course needs to be solid and needs to be exactly what you want as well. If it's like $30 and there's only like one lecture in it you're interested in for 5 minutes, probably not worth it. But if it is something like that, definitely worth to get the course.
Here's an interesting one. How would you add extra limbs while considering anatomy? Kind of like the Dark Souls character Morten made. Well, interesting, because I didn't consider anatomy. I literally just put the arms underneath. I made a bigger gap underneath the armpits and sort of hit it with the cloak from the back, so it sort of looks like it's blending in, but I didn't actually consider the anatomy. Now, to consider the anatomy, now that gets tricky, right? Now you have to invent anatomy. But let's take the arms as an example. It really depends on how real you're trying to make it. So let's say you're attaching a second pair of arms, like I have here. Okay, what arms need to function from the body, right? Is you need pecs in order to pull your arms closer together, right? You need delts to pull them up and down. You need a scapula on the back in order to retract them and sort of pull them back. You also need traps in order to make the up and down movement. Having 4 arms is like, I mean, that is a pain in the ass to try and figure out. You could probably do something. I mean, I would maybe try and look at what they did for John Carter. I'm curious how they actually solved that problem. But it's going to be like a puzzle where you try to make up the puzzle pieces as you go along. But like, try and think of it in terms of what does a limb need in order to function properly on the body? How can I fit those elements into my sculpt? The nice thing about inventing anatomy like that, especially for creatures, is that it can be a little more forgiving. I mean, not if you show it to like Scott Eaton, right? He'll be like, well, that doesn't work. Creatures can't have 4 arms. It's ridiculous. But for normal people, if it's for film, a game, whatever, most people will accept whatever goes on there. So yeah, I think that's the best answer I can give.
Not bashing Scott Eaton here, by the way, more like respecting his insane knowledge of anatomy.
Yeah. Not at all.
Yeah, I think, particularly from a production point of view, I think it would be don't do it, because unless you really have to, because like in a production you already have pre-made base meshes, and they're going to be basically pretty painful to have to like add more to that. All the blend shapes maybe the blend shape's going to work, but like you're going to have to spend a lot more time to do that. Now I'm just adding teeth to the character, and you have kind of like a few different ways of doing it. You can really make lips, and making sure the lips will go around it, like, it goes around like so, and then they just kind of go out of the lips. Or you can just kind of like chuck them in here, and he doesn't have lips whatsoever, and that's what I'm doing now. Also,
like this might be Rex's like distant cousin, yes, who's not all there.
Yeah. Also, maybe it's something like it's like evolutionary similar as well.
It's not a Krogan anymore. It's I don't know, a Rogan.
Yes, a Rogan. I think it's an interesting way of doing it, though, because for this guy here, I am going with my original design for him, but I very much based it off a Krogan, and that's a really good way of doing it, because if you're trying to come up with something original all by yourself, very painful. Like, it's really tricky to come up with something truly original. So instead just base it off the work somebody else has done.
That's an interesting challenge, actually. Try to do that. You take the concept from someone else, let's say Rex from Mass Effect, and then from that you sculpt a bust, right? And then you take your bust, and then you try to base your design off of that and make something different, and see like how they evolve. Like, that could be an interesting.
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Do like 10 of those to see, okay, what do they look like at the end there?
A really good tool here is the BMT, which is the Move Topological. And this allows you to just go in and just clear a mask here. This allows you to just move around the tooth like so that you can, I think there are some polygrips or something something wrong here. At least it allows you to just move stuff around. Really cool. You can also just mask it off and use a regular move brush. And this allows you to really just move one at a time. When doing this kind of stuff, really try to avoid symmetry because it's just gonna look weird. I also take it up to a certain level. Like now it's a decent spot, still rough, but it's okay. And then I try to like integrate it into the mouth. Like make sure the design is working before you take it too much further. Like meaning that try to make sure all elements are working at the same, like are working together and such. And I have a painting in my apartment now that's glaring in my eyes, so let's see how this goes.
I can see that.
I haven't seen it on the stream. Suddenly my eyes are really really bright.
I see you actually have sunlight in the UK right now.
Yeah, we do. I mean, for like about an hour more or so. Yeah, it's about to set.
We have like 120-mile-an-hour winds, sleet, rain. It's cold. It's just a terrible day outside.
Northern Europe should really just be avoided from like September and outwards. And then if you go north enough or like high enough in altitude, then it's fantastic because then you have snow. But apart from that, winter is just miserable here.
Yeah. Emilia and I were talking about, my wife, that maybe next year, if we get everything under control with the website and stuff, we might go to Japan during the fall and work from there a little bit.
Probably a very good idea.
Instead of sitting here where it's just cold and miserable.
It's just pointless to be in Northern Europe during winter. Not pointless, not like you always have a choice about it, but like, it's rough. He's saying that symmetrical teeth just means he's got a great dental plan. Yeah.
That galactic federal dental plan. Yes, Krogan's got the best shit.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting about teeth as well, you can really mess them up because with a face there are certain rules you have to do, but teeth you can kind of just make one of them super large. So I can try and just experiment with that as well. Just like really just push them up like so.
It is really confusing, sort of like, because I have real-time audio from Henning, but I have a 15-second delay for what he's sculpting, and also like seeing us on screen. So he's explaining things. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I can't wait to actually see what he is explaining. I just have to use my imagination.
Just have to trust me.
Someone is saying we could call it a schmogan instead of a Krogan.
I like that. I feel there is a Joe Rogan joke in there as well.
Is there a course to introduce hard surface in ZBrush for beginners? The Ben Erd course looks too advanced to get into.
That sounds like a Morten course to do.
I feel like we've got some high quality hard surface courses on FlippedNormals as well. I actually thought about doing an intro course for hard surface, but then I didn't. So
a cool story.
Actually, there is this course from Sean Fowler that just came out.
That's a really cool.
Where that is basically what you need. Covers a lot of really good stuff in ZBrush. The problem with me and hard surface is that I have a very, let's call it old school approach to hard surface in there. And I don't use 90% of the tools that have been developed for ZBrush when it comes to hard surface. Like all the micro mesh, nano mesh, array mesh stuff. Basically, I mean, sometimes array mesh, but not really a lot. I like to sculpt it by hand. And, the downside is you don't get that super clean hard surface that you could get in ZBrush. But I don't know. It's the approach, the more organic approach I like to do.
This was interesting watching the Ben Erd course because he does something similar to you actually there. Not really so many fancy techniques, more just like sculpting the shapes in, and then for his high polys, he just goes in and just sculpts them with just Dynamesh, just making sure it's like high res and just using the various brushes. Let me find this one so people know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and also, then just retopologizes it afterwards.
So reminder: 50% off all products on FlippedNormals during a Black Friday sale. Little banner down here as well somewhere. weird pointing around. I don't really see where I'm pointing, but it's down below. So this is
you should just have a graphic that keeps like an arrow pointing down at the banner.
This is the bend course, and he sculpted this in ZBrush, and then he retopologized in Blender and in Modo, and really cool seeing his workflow for it. Like, it's just really interesting seeing how you can build something like this. It's also interesting because it's very different from what I'm normally doing, because this is very like it's kind of like a mix between games and film, where I'm used to everything having needed to be sub-D ready, where he's doing kind of like a high poly and low poly, and then he bakes it, and well, I would never bake something for the work I'm doing, so it's very interesting seeing his work. But at the same time, he also has like a gajillion UDIMs as well, so it doesn't work for games directly, but it's more like a mix, like, I guess, cinematics. I'm just experimenting with the character as well. You reach a point where you get blind to the character, like it's really hard to properly make it interesting, so that's why I'm just trying to just zoom out and just see what happens, seeing if I can break the silhouette up to some extent and just have fun with that.
Someone's asking, do you retopo the teeth later on or just use a decimation plugin? It depends on the purpose. So like if I was doing it for production, for example, right? And those, like, say it was those specific teeth that Henning he's sculpting now. What I would do is I would do one tooth, just retopo that tooth, and I would do the UVs for it, and then I would just duplicate that tooth and then make variations from that, because that way I don't have to make the UVs for 20 different teeth. It's got the same topology, and if I make UV changes, I can always duplicate it or copy it to other teeth. If it's just for an illustration like this, I just take the teeth and decimate them. You could sear mesh them and then subdivide and sculpt a little more if you needed something extra, but for most of the time, just pure decimation works fine.
Yeah, it all depends on the use case for it. There's no such thing as doing things in a universal way, because every single, like, quote-unquote rule in 3D is not really a rule. It just depends. Oh, you shouldn't have n-gons. You can totally have n-gons. Oh, you shouldn't have triangles. You can totally have triangles. But can you have triangles in areas where it deforms? Probably not. Should you have n-gons in ZBrush? No. But can you have n-gons when you're modeling in Maya? Yeah, you can. So like, it really just basically we just turned rocks into thinking computers, and now we're trying to make art from these rocks with electricity in them. Like, there isn't anything
rocks with electricity.
It's basically what it is, right? Like, all else to say is, like, a computer isn't some kind of like divine thing made from the gods. It's just us trying to do the best we can, and then now we're just trying to make cool looking monsters based on that. So it really just depends entirely on what the output is. Basically, figure out what the output is and then build based on that. If you're like, the same thing with the poly count question from before, what's a poly count for something? It depends just entirely on what the output is for. Topology is one of those things that's very misunderstood, because one of the things I keep teaching in the modeling courses and such is that you shouldn't chase visually appealing topology. Visually appealing topology is the kind of stuff that, goes around and looks super nice and all that. This kind of stuff looks really cool, and it's like, yes, this pleases my brain because we are pattern seeking devices and we like this kind of stuff. But this may not be the best topology, because topology is a way to optimize for a certain thing. If you're making something for a VR game, you need to optimize for performance. And if you optimize for performance, you're going to the visual quality is going to drop. And if you're optimizing for visual quality, meaning final deformation, well, now your performance is going to suffer, right? So the most optimized VR model in the world, which has the best topology for any VR game, is going to be terrible for a movie, and vice versa. So it really just depends. Same if you have a character which is going to move his brows a lot, you need, like, his eyebrows or like his wrinkles here, they're going to deform a lot. You need probably bespoke topology for that. But if you have the exact same character, but that character doesn't deform so much, you don't need bespoke topology there. So really figure out what the output is and build topology based on that. Don't make visually pleasing topology just to do that.
It is nice though, like visually pleasing
Yes.
topology. It does something to you. You're like, oh
Yeah. Let
man,
me show an
that is nice.
example of that, of visually pleasing topology. Let's see here.
While you do that, we got a funny message from someone saying, "I'm studying in Fukuoka right now." So I'm
Hey.
surprised to see that Morten have lived, worked there in Fukuoka as well. What was the occasion? Well, I originally went there many years ago now and did an
2013,
internship.
wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that, and did an internship there. Lived with a Japanese family, and then a couple of years back, it's like 3 years ago now.
Yeah,
It's
almost 4 years.
God damn. Okay, so 4 years ago, we actually, Henning, myself, and my wife, we moved to Japan and we lived and worked there for a year. And we were working on FlippedNormals at the time.
Yeah, long story short, we were there for, Morten was there for a full year. I was there for like 9 months in total or something like that.
Mm.
The summers in Fukuoka are warm, and my god, they're warm.
Yeah, they're brutal. But even though it's funny though, because like even though they were warm, and I think almost every day we're like, oh, okay, definitely not going out tomorrow. For some reason, at noon every day we're like, should we go for a walk? Yeah, okay, let's do it.
We had an interesting one there in my apartment right next to Morton's. We were recording a tutorial at some point, and I was sitting right next to the window, and Morton was sitting right next to me, and we had the AC on, and it was so warm outside that I was burning up, and it was so cold where Morton was sitting that he had to wear a sweater. So and we were sitting a meter apart from that.
So tough.
Fukuoka was a nice city. It was really like modern, but not really like overly touristy.
Mm. Which also means if you don't speak any Japanese, it's going to be tricky to live there.
That was tricky. Here's a question from Sudir. Whose concept are you using to make the sculpt? Well, I'm using a screenshot from Mass Effect, but I haven't looked at that in about like half an hour or so now. So basically, you know how in the tutorials we say don't sculpt from imagination, use somebody else's concept and have tons of reference? Yeah, I'm doing the opposite of that right now. So I should really look at some proper reference for this, but yeah, just kind of doodling around. So I guess we're using yeah, I know. I guess we're using a Henny concept for this. But this kind of stuff is also super comfort food for me. Like this is just doodling around. Like I've done a bajillion of these sculpts before. So like if I try to sculpt like a Victoria's Secret model right now, I would need a lot of reference because that stuff is not comfort zony for me. But this kind of stuff is, I can kind of do this while sleeping, I think. Because I've done so many of these kind of monsters. If I have 12 subdivision levels, would that be too heavy on my GPU or my CPU? That depends entirely what your lowest level is. If you were like on a model I worked on recently for the masterclass that had 8 subdivision levels, and then the 8th was 65 million or 61 million polygons. So if you were to add like 4 more to that, that would like break the universe. But if you have if the lowest level is like 4 polys, then it's fine. But essentially try to not go above, like for general working models, try not to go above like 10 million polygons. And if you're going crazy with detailing, really, like I find the cap for me is around 65 million polys. If I go anything above that, then my computer is really starting to give me issues. And also it's starting to, the files are getting so massive that it becomes a real pain to save them and such. Like the files then are like about a gigabyte each, gig and a half. So that becomes quite painful.
On average, how many UDEM tiles are used for a single production-ready character? Depends.
Depends if it's like how close it is, and also if you're using 4K or 8K. Because like if you have 4K, then you have 16 million pixels. But if you have 8K, then you have 64 million pixels, which is obviously a lot more. Generally, maybe like 50 to 100 or so. But it really depends on how close up the character is.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely more hero character territory. If you have a background character that maybe comes from a scan and then it's just retopologized just for the background, maybe 5 to 10 or even less, depending on how far away they are. So it really varies a lot.
And that sounds like a lot. Wow, 10 UDIMs. Yeah, but you can make each UDIM 500 by 500. You know, you can scale this up and down. It's not necessarily heavier to have multiple UDIMs than it is to have like to scale up the texture map. Though some game artists will argue with me there, but don't for film and commercials. It's for all practical purposes. It's not going to be that much heavier. Here's a good one. Which alpha from the skin kit is the best for the overall body? Let's have a look. So we have a few different alphas here. So we have here we have the skin kit. Let me actually show this one. This is a really cool kit. Somebody was mentioning the skin kit as well before. I'm just gonna find the skin kit just so we know what we're talking about, and that's here. See here, skin kit should be. Skin kit, I think, is the most popular product on all of FlippedNormals. So that's really cool. So here is the skin kit. This is a kit we made like 4 years ago now, 3.5 years ago. And this is just a kit that is fantastic at getting in like all these like little wrinkles and pores and all that. Like all of this is just made with the skin kit. There isn't really such a thing as the best one, but there are a lot of really good ones. So for instance, some really good ones would be like this one, Pores 01. I just have to switch this to the standard brush, double click this one, and then it's going to appear over here, and then hit Alt and A. This is my own custom hotkey for changing the mid value. This is just something you have to do. Basically, the mid value here is just something that you have to modify for these specific alphas, because it just means you have a lot more range in your alpha. So I'm just going to subdivide this a few times and then undo it. So you can see here we get really nice skin textures. So this one is probably one of the best ones for this. So you can just see how insanely fast you can actually do this. I think I might actually play around with some of these, because there are some cool things you can do with the alphas. We have another one as well. Let me show you before that. Let me just post a link to this in the chat. The skin kit is legit a really good product. Like it's, you know, I made the alphas for it, so I'm a bit biased there. But I use this all the time. Basically, the products we're making, we make them for ourselves, and then we figure out that other people are interested in them as well. But we have another one which is very similar to this, called the face kit, which is not here. Let's see from the top.
It's actually interesting, right? Some of our best selling products are products we've made to solve an issue that we had ourselves.
Yeah. This is the face kit as well. I did not make this one, but this is fantastic as well. This is based on scan data, and then we extract the scan data out into maps, and we can just get super close up for this. So this is more for the face, and the skin kit is more generic skin. Like this one has more general wrinkles and all sorts of stuff. Well, this is very specific for the face. So I can show this actually. Like there is actually some cool use cases with this. If I go up a little bit, and then we go to face kit old, because we had an old face and we had a young face. And there are some really cool ones here we can use. One of the favorite ones is just like the nasolabial fold. This is from the old guy's nasolabial fold. So then we can just use it here to get like general details and such. Like obviously this is far too low res to be used right now. But what's cool about it is you can do this kind of stuff, and then you can start to see patterns, which is really useful. So you can start to like see general things you can have, and then you can go over this and smooth it out, and you can just get more variation. Like when you're sculpting, you control everything yourself, which is fantastic, because it means that everything is under your direct control. The problem is that we are very pattern-seeking machines with our brains, so it's very easy for us to just find very generic patterns, and everything is very even and spaced out and all that. So if you use alphas, it's a fantastic way to like block things out, or to get like more like not procedural but just general variation, which is really useful. So you can use this in really cool ways like this. You can also like hold out the Alt key just to get the crazy patterns for this. I'm just going to experiment a bit with this here. We might use this a bit later on. But yeah, the skin kit and the face kit are really solid products, and they work very well together. Kind of like this. Some interesting shapes here. Again, Morten cannot see what I'm talking about for about 15 seconds. But
I'm sure they're interesting shapes.
Yeah, trust me. And then you can sculpt on top of them as well, just with like some like damp standard brush and such. But you can see even now when I'm using damp standard, I'm very pattern seeking. I'm trying to make everything nice and soft, while you don't necessarily want nice and soft characters like this. So it's very hard to break that pattern up in your hand, and your brain is just gonna try to seek like harmony, and you really don't necessarily want harmony when you're sculpting characters like this.
I had a question somewhere, but now I lost it. What was it? Let's have a look. Let's take this one. Could you please advise me what beginner level tablet should I buy? Not the pricey and good for sculpting. I want to dive hard into ZBrush. Don't want to do that with the mouse. That is an excellent starting point. I think the cheap ones they have from Wacom, even like something like the bamboo tablet, is probably a good entry. Do you know if XP Pen or Huion they do graphic tablets?
No idea.
Okay, but I mean, I've used their screen tablets, both XP Pen and Huion. So I would assume that if they have any normal cheaper graphic tablets, they would be fairly decent. But otherwise, the cheaper Wacom tablets are also a good place to start. They're small, but they're definitely more affordable.
They're around like $60. They used to be. I don't know if the price has increased or not. I've been using one of these. My girlfriend has one of them, and it's very small, which is fantastic if you're traveling. So like this Christmas, I'm going back to Norway, and probably gonna bring that with me just because it's much smaller, so I can do some sculpting if I want to. So because the other ones, they're just large. Particularly if you have something like a display tablet, right? You can't really bring that with you in your suitcase, but you can very much bring a tiny one with you.
I'm glad you guys put some GPU power into Morten in today's stream. Last stream, he was very low res. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I mean, I have shitty internet where I live, so
yeah, that's probably it.
Temporary, though.
You have wind in your internet in Denmark.
Yeah. Right now, we're just in some random house in the middle of nowhere. So
just a random house. Don't even know whose it is. It's just found one.
Who could it be? Yeah, it's a random house. But the internet isn't always the best out here.
I had a friend of mine who lived in the desert, and he said he said he always got sand in his internet when internet got slow.
Man, that's the worst.
I hate when you get sand in your internet.
I'm actually curious for places like that where you're really far out, how good the service is for Starlink, the SpaceX service there. I know they're sending up more and more satellites, and the whole Starlink 2 constellation is supposed to be launched with their Starship, but like because they're so massive, they can't put them on normal rockets yet. Seems like an interesting concept.
That's cool.
I know that Amazon is doing something similar there as well to try and probably compete with it. Seems like anything Elon Musk tries to do, Jeff Bezos wants to replicate.
Now for the sculpt, I'm just making some random shapes. Just like trying things out, seeing what works. I'm still using the Smooth Stronger. Smooth Stronger is brilliant for this kind of stuff. You just have to be careful that it doesn't completely nuke your sculpt. It's one of those, it takes a bit of time to get used to. The way I found the Smooth Stronger brush was that it was a default in ZBrush years ago. I think it might have been like version 3 or something. For one point version, I think this was a default smoothing brush, and people were hating it because it's just insane. Like it's a complete bonkers thing to make that a default one, and then they reverted back, and then you put it onto the folders there. So that was really cool. Like I really enjoyed it using the Smooth Stronger. I'm pretty sure it was a Smooth Stronger.
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, and it was, but it's just completely wild to have something like nukes your model as the default one, and then they went back to the same smooth brush they've had since like ZBrush 2 in 2004 or something. The sculpting in ZBrush really has not changed in years. They like 2004 ZBrush 2 came out. Sculpting is basically the same then as it is now, which is like 18 years ago. Then like 2010, 11, 12, something like that, they added the clay brushes. A bit later, they added like clay buildup, and after that, the core sculpting has really just remained the same. And they've added tons of new features here and there, but like the core is very much unchanged.
Yeah, that's something that I like. Yeah. I like that it doesn't change. It's they nailed something with the sculpting feel very early on, and I think they know. So it just whatever, don't change it. Most of the time, I don't really care about all the new features. Most of them, at least for my purposes, tend to be pretty gimmicky, and I don't use them a lot.
Yeah.
Occasionally, there will be like one feature where you're like, okay, that is actually pretty cool.
I like this feature up here actually. The if you can just see on the top right corner where you have the cam view. This is where we had this in yesterday's stream as well. This is something I just figured out just by accident, that it's like I was thinking that, man, you can change this. This is a default, and it's useful because you can move it around. You can see that. But it was like, what if you just were to change it to your own model? So I just changed it to like a skeleton and an anatomy model. This means I have reference here for skeletons and anatomy at all times, and you can change this all like this, so you can just move it around like this. So really, really useful just to have that there. We have of course the anatomy model as well, but it's just really cool to have it in. Obviously it doesn't change all the time, but it's just generally changing the direction. It doesn't help me whatsoever with this guy here though, because he doesn't really follow normal human anatomy. But one thing though that is actually kind of interesting, that he doesn't really follow normal human anatomy in the sense that the fat pads and the muscles and all that, but he's still kind of human. I could morph this guy into a human very quickly. That's actually kind of cool. Very quickly, just by moving some things around here and there. Because figure sculpting and portrait sculpting is really like the foundation of anything. So like he still has cheekbones and such. So you could kind of make it so that this is just a person with, like, obviously if the eyes were closer, that you could do that, and he would just be a person with heavy prosthetics on.
Yeah, here 15 seconds later, I could see what you were doing. Do you guys have a tip on how to model more clean, so it's not a piece of clay? How to do more muscle structures and stuff? Let me see. Model more clean. It's an iterative process, right? Where you slowly refine it. I think that's the best way I can put it. In the beginning, it is just going to be very messy, and then you start to clean up different chunks in your sculpt just as you go along. Any tips for doing quick color theory studies? I want to make cool, colorful creatures, fun with poly paint, and I would love to know if there's a course or resource I can use to improve. I don't know of a specific course in order to do that. Maybe we should make one. It's not a bad idea.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah. But in terms of practicing it, I would probably try to find a bunch of different concept art on ArtStation and find different color palettes that you like. You find characters and you think, okay, the color palette on this is pretty cool. Try to analyze what makes it work. What's the combination of colors, the saturation levels, the hues, and the intensity of the color, and why does that actually work? You could try to do that.
Here's actually an interesting comment. It's like Mystery Affinity is saying, I love how Henning focuses on mid-frequency a lot. And like, yeah, thank you. Mid-frequency is one of these things that a lot of people don't get right or don't even consider. So I can just break it down. Like, we talk a little bit about different frequencies. So you have the primary shapes. Basically, we have 1, 2, and 3 primary, secondary, and tertiary shapes, or like primary, mid-frequency, and like fine shapes. And the first one, this would be, I should probably do this with colors. So the first one would be like the main shapes, like this, the big bold shapes, like so. All of this kind of stuff is just primary shapes. It's the kind of stuff, if you were to blur the absolute life out of an image, you would you would see only these shapes. And then you would have some mid-frequency shapes. These are the ones that break up the primary shapes. So this would be stuff like this kind of things, and all these kind of smaller little things, but also like the specific shape of the eye and such as well. All these kind of things are really going to help break up the sculpture, and it's essential to get life into the character. Basically, if you only have the primary shapes, then you're going to have like a good stylized sculpt. It might feel like it's like it has life to it and all that, but you're never going to think that it's like a living thing. But then if you have secondary shapes, now you're going to really make sure it feels like it's fleshy and it's really like alive. but you're still not going to believe that it's a real thing. It's going to be like, you might think that, oh man, this is a really good statue. And then you have tertiary shapes. Tertiary shapes are the ones that are the things that break up these shapes again. So this would be like the tiny little wrinkles going across it like so. It would be the little pores. It would be all these kind of things that make it feel like it's actually a living thing. This is where you would go from a it's a good statue to you actually believe that the thing is alive. So you really want to spend a lot of time on the different frequencies. So I really spend a lot of time on mid frequency, and also like a bonus of having fantastic mid frequency is that honestly texturing characters becomes a million times easier. Like if you try to texture a model that doesn't have good mid frequency, then you're just going to be in trouble. The reason is that then you're going to have really good primary shapes and you're going to have really good tertiary shapes, but you're not going to have good mid frequency, and then you just have to over texture the model. So it's legit really hard to texture anything without good mid frequency. This is something we spent a lot of time on in the latest course I did, which was let's see where we can find this guy. A lot of tabs. Let's see here. This guy here. In this model here, we spent a lot of time making sure the mid frequency is right. The actual texture map for him, if I can find that here, is actually quite simple. It's essentially all in the sculpt and in the fine little details as well. Also, this course is 50% off now as well. And here you can see like the final color map. So it's really quite simple. If you were to do this without good mid frequency, you would be in trouble. This would not be working at all, just because it's not too simple. It's where it should be, but you need the frequencies. You need the frequencies to be in the correct spot. That's really, really going to help you. So all in all, thank you for the compliment about the nice mid frequency.
And remember, everything that we're showing you on screen during the stream here is 50% off during our Black Friday week sale. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, we made a lot of really cool products this year. We have the face kit, which is really, really solid face alphas. Just drag and drop the alphas in here, and you can do this kind of stuff. Just really cool stuff. Then we have face texturing in Substance Painter, which covers how to do a realistic face in Substance Painter and how to do shading in Arnold Arnold in Maya. Then we have the masterclass I just showed you. Then we have Morten's Dark Souls course as well that covers how to do basically a Dark Souls boss in like 18 hours. One thing we're really getting started with or really taking seriously with all these courses is that everything is real time in them. We're not skipping any steps. Every single thing is shown. This is like one of the biggest things we got feedback on. Even if there are mistakes or such, we'll show you the mistakes and how to fix the mistakes. Unless it's like an absolute cardinal sin, then we'll just edit that kind of stuff out and redo it. But really, it's like an honest and like curated approach to how to do it. Like we're obviously spend a lot of time on making sure it's right. What a lot of people do, I find when doing tutorials, is they're like, oh, everything is real time, but it means everything is unedited. It just means they haven't taken the time to edit it. Our stuff is still heavily edited. It's just streamlined. We just aren't cutting away anything essential. Tons of small mistakes, cough break, or like we have to cough and drink water, or we say the wrong words, cut that kind of stuff out. Basically, we really try to take production quality seriously when we do these kind of courses.
Someone's asking if I'll be at FlippedNormals.
Oh yeah!
What the hell is FlippedNormals?
Yeah, so you haven't been around the FlippedNormals Discord for a while, Morten. FlippedNormals is the annual FlippedNormals Christmas tradition,
right?
Hosted by Robo or Ricardo at our Discord. So if you want to attend FlippedNormals, shoot me a message. It's quite nice. It's just some people just watching movies and drinking beers and other Christmas alcohols and such. Right. I will be attending FlippedNormals this year.
If Henning's gonna be there, then I don't know. Oh,
yeah. I promise I'll shower beforehand.
Yeah, maybe that could be interesting. We have a question here about Bernard's new course. Is Modo really necessary, or could I do it by substituting it with Blender?
100%. He uses Modo a lot, or Blender a lot there as well. Modo, he uses Modo a fair bit, but like there isn't really anything too crazy in Modo there. It's just polygon modeling tools. Poly modeling is poly modeling. It's really down to personal preference.
Which course teaches the Dark Souls boss again? That would be creating a full character in ZBrush. Let me find it for you.
Let's see if we can find it up here. I should really close some tabs. I'm going to close some tabs now. This is one. So this shows how to make a Dark Souls style boss. All the weapons as well, right? That's all shown, right, Morten?
All of it. Everything you see on screen, we do everything.
That's really cool.
Skip out on anything.
It's a pretty hard thing to do when you're introducing like making weapons and such. Like what is your approach for that, Morten, like doing the weapons?
I find a couple pieces of concept art or a couple of weapons, like pictures of weapons or something that I like and that I want to combine. And then I use just basic primitives in ZBrush with a little bit of ZModeler. It's janky, but ZModeler can, make this work just so I have some basic shape. And then once I have the basic shape in place, I just dynamesh it and then I just start sculpting. And that's basically my approach. I kind of think of it like I'm a smith a little bit. I have a giant chunk of metal and then I just start carving away and like doing stuff to it. That's my general approach. It's the same thing with armor, except for armor, I generally don't use primitives. I'll just extract the mesh directly from the body, unless it's like a very specific piece of armor that's not as form fitted to the body. Then I could use a primitive. But yeah, that's my general approach.
Yeah, ZBrush is so powerful with everything there. Like it's really cool that you can do everything there with directly within ZBrush. I personally prefer like more traditional hard surface modeling tools, but that's just completely personal preference. But then it's really cool that you can take it on into ZBrush and just like bash it around there as well. Yeah.
One of them normally I would do the base stuff in Maya or Blender, for example. But for this course, it's 100% ZBrush focused, right, for 99% of it. So I decided to just keep it in ZBrush. That way everyone could follow along. I thought it was just a little bit easier. The only time we really go out of ZBrush is to go into Blender in order to render the final character.
That's something that I'm very aware of when making courses, about like making it simple for the student or the person taking the course to actually follow along. Oftentimes I'm not doing the exact same way in real life as I do in the course, but it's much more streamlined. Maybe, for instance, I would use 2 different software, but now I'm using one software just to keep it simple and such. And that also depends on like what the end result is as well.
Yeah, exactly. And you want to do it for the sake of the tutorial, for something like this. I feel like it's better to just stick with ZBrush because you can do it in ZBrush. So if people maybe they don't know Blender or they don't know Maya or Max, maybe they're a little bit lost and they wouldn't know how to approach that. So I think if you can, when you're teaching like this, it's like trying to keep it to that software. I think it helps. But like say with the Ben Erd course, for example, there's no way, like literally no way you would want to do all that modeling in ZBrush.
No.
The course, you could probably maybe do it, but the course would be like 100 hours long because of ZBrush.
That's kind of the way I'm thinking about courses, the levels of courses, because that's something we really had to consider over the last few years. Before, we used to kind of make courses that was like for people who wants to do 3D, but then we were like, no, we need to separate around it into skill levels. So like a beginner course is very different from an advanced course. Yeah. So for a beginner course, it's not so much about the final product. It's way more about the process, how to get there. While an advanced course, it's not so much about the process. It's much more about getting the final result to look super nice, which means that a beginner course is going to have to be much cleaner in its approach, and it means that you can't really iterate stuff and go back and forth. Well, for instance, on the one I had here, It's like, this is a fairly advanced course. Like, you know, it's between intermediate and advanced. And it's like, the sculpting here, for instance, there are chapters which is like 3 hours of just sculpting, and it's very iterative and it's boring, and it's like it just is what it is. You can't make that interesting. There is, of course, a little bit of change from each chapter, but it just takes a long time to get there. But in courses like that, you just have to spend the time it takes to get to that final result. While in more beginner courses, the final result will suffer, because you can't ask a beginner to just noodle around for like 3 hours. It's just not feasible. Also, there wouldn't be a point to it, because the person who's watching the course, who would be a beginner, they wouldn't be able to do that anyway. Like, they wouldn't be able to follow along with that. So it would, basically what I'm saying is, once you're building a more advanced course, you're making a less streamlined workflow, but you're focusing more on the final result. And if you're building a beginner course, you have to focus on making the process proper, streamlined, and easy to follow and all that, which means it's very hard to make beginner courses. They're some of the hardest courses I know how to make, like, by far.
You're also very good at it now. I mean, your approach to it is very methodical, and I mean, I think the reviews for our intro and beginner courses kind of speak for themselves. I mean, they're literally, I think, only 5-star reviews for them.
Yeah, it's usually like that.
And I think you've figured out a way now to disseminate that, you know, distill the knowledge of, like, okay, how do we funnel that down into something that is beginner friendly and the beginners would understand. How you don't go crazy doing that, I don't understand.
Oh, no, I do go crazy.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I just go completely crazy. It's really tricky when you do that, when you're talking about like beginner courses, because you have to. First, one of the things that's really tricky about beginner courses is that you truly will have to understand the subject matter, because you can't just go and be like, yeah, this is kind of how nodes work. No, you have to really understand how it works, because you have to be highly specific in your wording. But also you have to find a lot of analogies for how to talk about things. Like, if you're a beginner to sculpting, you can't just go in and just overwhelm people. You have to find ways to simplify it down and use language that is easy to understand and such. Same thing with your, like, an intro course. We made an intro to Maya, I think came out last year. And it's just really tricky to convey complicated subject matters. In some of the videos, we're going like, this here is not something you're going to use every single day, but it's foundational to how Maya works. Like, for instance, how Maya is node-based. That kind of stuff is really important to understand, but it's also like, it's not something you need every single day. So it's about conveying it to, like, in a way that actually makes sense, which is really hard to do.
Finnery is asking, Henning, why do you break symmetry so early? It's because you know this project won't get retopoed.
In this case, yeah. If this was retopologized, I would break this. I will break this probably after retopology. At this point, right, this is just a fun concept sculpt. I'm not really going to use this for anything more. Maybe we'll continue this in a later stream this week. But basically, this is just entirely for fun. Normally, I would not break symmetry early on at all. We just spoke about this in yesterday's stream, but like a quick recap for it. If you start to break symmetry before retopology, you're just in trouble. It's just going to take much, much longer, particularly if you work in a collaborative setting, because now suddenly the texture artist can't work entirely symmetrical, the rigger can't do that, you can't necessarily use a pre-made base mesh. It's just a world of pain the moment you start to work without symmetry.
The adaptation of AI art becoming more powerful each day. Can you see 3D artists going out of business in the future? The future is far away. I mean, I guess the future is literally now. But in terms of going out of business, no, I don't really see that happening anytime soon.
Where it's interesting is that we tend to think in a very linear fashion that, well, if AI can do the job of a 3D artist, that means that there's going to be less 3D artists. What we've seen over the last many years is that the demand for 3D artists has entirely exploded with like mobile gaming and all that. That was not like that's a second order effect of cell phones becoming completely mainstream. Everyone will have a cell phone now, and like with VR becoming a thing as well, you just have a whole new market. We don't know what the second order effect of AI is going to be. Maybe it means that there's a whole new field out there, like when when photography took over for painting, like that opened up for films. Like it's a whole new business which opened up, a whole new industry of photographers. Basically, we genuinely don't know. It's not just gloom and doom. It's we truly do not know what the second order effects of AI is going to be. Is there going to be a whole new industry started? We don't know. Like the more immediate things, I think, is that smaller teams are going to be able to do more with less. For instance, we're just a very tiny team at FlippedNormals, and if we have AI to do more things, that means we're going to be able to do more things ourselves, which is going to be great. Just like having AI now for like spell checking and like being able to do things like that. If we could write like product descriptions with AI, just basically just like type in what is this product about, and we can just have an AI fill it in. That kind of stuff wouldn't take anyone's job, because we don't hire anyone for that anyway. It would just mean that my job is done faster, which is fantastic, and that means I can go on to do more things. But if we were hiring for the job of like copywriting, and that person now went away, that would obviously be bad for that person. But since we're not, we would just be able to output a lot more ourselves. Basically, more YouTube videos.
Thank you for the 3 Bulgarian lev. I think that's what that
thank you very much.
Is. Oh, this was another question somewhere. What was it? Oh no, a bunch of questions. Since you guys have used both Blender and Maya, which ones do you think is more powerful for just modeling? Blender with hard ups and Mesh Machine, or Maya? That's more you. You've more used Blender for modeling than me. So, what would you say?
The hard ups and Voxcore and such, they're incredibly powerful tools. Vanilla out of the box, they're very, very similar. I would say they're quite similar to what you're doing. You have like tools like Decal Machine, I think it's called, for like decals, and like you have cool tools with trim sheets and such, which you don't have for Maya. So if you're dealing with plugins and for specific tasks, Blender might be winning that one. In terms of like pure polygonal modeling, they're very similar. I want to use this opportunity to rant a little bit about Blender because
oh, it's been a while. Let's get into it.
Yeah, it's been a while. That's a little Blender rant. I haven't used Maya in a little while now, but if I were to go back to Maya, I would be able to jump into it basically right away. I know that because I've done this. I've been in a situation beforehand, and the reason for that is if you want to model in Maya, you just use the shift right mouse button and that brings up a marking menu. If you haven't been modeling in Blender for a while, you're like, oh man, there are 30 hotkeys I need to understand now.
And re-remember.
There is technically a way to model in Blender without hotkeys, people always use that argument, yeah, but you have everything in interface. Yes, but the interface, the UX is fundamentally hotkey based, which means if you work in Blender every single day, it's really fast. Like the hotkeys there are going to be stupidly fast. But if you don't work with Blender every single day, it's really tricky to get into, and it's really tricky to remember it, just because it is so hotkey based. We talked to Andrew Price some years ago, Blender Guru, and he was talking about how Blender was like playing the piano, and it is, which means if you do like lighting and rendering and such, it's not that hotkey based. But particularly for modeling, it's tricky because in something like Maya, it's more like logic based. Yeah, you have your stuff on your shelf and you click on the shelf and you click on the extrude tool and all that. While it's more like visual, but in Blender it is just you need to get it into your muscle memory. So that is like one of my key complaints about Blender. It's like in terms of UX, it's so reliant on hotkeys. I'm sure some people would disagree about that, but that is like the number one thing I have whenever I go back to Blender. I'm like, man, these fingers do not remember exactly how that software works, so now I have to spend like half an hour just getting up to speed on that again.
It's funny because I think in a way Blender suffers from that same affliction that ZBrush does, where they're both two incredibly powerful tools, but if you take a break, things just start to slip away, especially vanilla software wise for both of them. It's like when I have to get into ZBrush again after a while, and it's like always, where is that thing, and
how do I save again?
Okay, it's not that bad, but yeah, I feel like both Blender and ZBrush suffer from that same issue.
Yeah, ZBrush, the interface or the UX, this user experience in ZBrush is rough. It's tricky, and you only start to realize this once you properly teach it. For instance, ZBrush rant coming up. Normally, the menus up here are based from most useful to least useful. So you have like file and you have edit and like modify and all that in like regular software. And then you have like help over here because that's what you care about. A, B, C, D, E, F. You see the point? It's alphabetical. Why is the menus alphabetical up here? So it's like, in terms of usefulness, it's like, oh, I use transform a lot. I use tool by far the most, and then file, and like just use UI conventions that we've had for 40 years now. But it's not just that. It's also like, it's everything. It's like, oh, you want to save? Oh yeah, cool. Document save. Boom, easy peasy. Oh yeah, that actually destroys your model. There's no warning about that. It just means that if you use that, your work will 100% be lost. Oh, you do file save as. Oh yeah, awesome. Now it's going to save with your undo history active, and it's going to save all the tools here, and it's going to be like 8 gigabytes large. And now you can open your file again because your max file opening is like 4 gigabytes. Oh, actually, you want to save here? Yeah, cool. That only saves this one. It doesn't save this one. So saving is just a mess in ZBrush. I only realize how bad or how wonky the UX in ZBrush is the moment they add new features to it, because then I have to learn these features and I feel like such a beginner. If they add a new feature to Maya or Paint or something, I'm like, oh cool, yeah, okay, I can probably figure out by myself. New feature in ZBrush is like, all right, time to watch a tutorial by Michael Pavlovic or read documentation. And then we kind of hope that works. Very frustrating, very frustrating. I think my rant's over now. It felt good to get that out.
I mean, it's garbage.
Yeah.
You know?
It's almost like a shame, like with ZBrush, because ZBrush has not great UI or UX, but it has fantastic sculpting tools. Well, Mudbox is kind of the opposite, where the UX, the UI in Mudbox is great. It's really easy to learn. You can how do you import a file in ZBrush? I don't know. Oh, it's on a tool and import. Oh, cool. But that replaces what you currently have active. So you have to actually go append and add a new one. How do you do it in a Mudbox? File import. Right? It's just much more intuitive to
I think ZBrush also suffers there a little bit because it doesn't operate like a traditional 3D software, right? Because it has its roots in that weird 2D paint software thing. Right? So each tool is separate. They don't really share a 3D space. It's more like a hack that it's actually a 3D representation we're even seeing on screen. So that doesn't really help. I think one of the big things that they added a couple of years ago, which was fantastic, is the whole being able to move multiple subtools at once.
Oh yeah.
That sort of gives it that, okay, we're
That's
in
this
3D
one here,
space now.
that you can actually move it around.
So wonderful.
Without this,
So
you can only move one. Yeah, I both love and I hate ZBrush at the same time. It's
Terex is saying, I'm glad FlippedNormals agree with me on the ZBrush UI. I think everyone agrees with you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I've really spoken to a lot of people that love the ZBrush UI.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine some months ago, and he was we were talking about this, that well, the ZBrush UI is actually great because I can customize it to fit exactly what I need to do. And then he was like, but because I have to do that, that probably means that it's not kind of crap. Because if you use like the interface in like Painter, like you don't really have to customize anything in Painter. Well, not that you can't customize that much, but you don't have to. Customizing the interface in Blender, you don't really have to do it go that crazy. Same with Photoshop and such. It just kind of makes sense. But here you really have to have your own custom interface. Every single interface you've ever seen with ZBrush is going to look different.
Yeah.
Which makes it tricky as well. You open up somebody's ZBrush and it's like you're used to playing the piano, but now suddenly they customize it to be like a flute or something and you're just in trouble. Yeah, Squishy, you can customize it. You can move them by multiple by clicking this button right here. These guys. This allows you to move multiple subtools, which is fantastic.
Adam Temple is saying, I'm surprised you haven't set up industry keys in Blender. I have to flip software all the time. No more Blender keyboard clawing for me. Well, there's a simple explanation for that.
Aha.
We make tutorials for people. And also when people follow the vast majority of tutorials out there, they don't use the industry key shortcuts in Blender. Everything is vanilla Blender. There might be occasional shortcuts or hotkeys that people set up themselves, but for usability and being able to reach the most amount of people, it doesn't really make sense for us to switch the key hotkey layout.
It's also the case that I actually recommend people not to use the industry compatible one, and the reason for that is honestly quite simple. It's because you will not be able to follow in tutorials when you're learning Blender. Since it is so hotkey based and you're trying to use the industry compatible ones, you're not going to be able to really follow tutorials because they're going to be like, oh, hit the E, then R, and Z key, and that's essential to do the feature you want to do, but it just doesn't do what it's supposed to. And now you have to go in and remap things and look at what those hotkeys are. So it becomes a legit really tricky to learn ZBrush if you're using the industry compatible ones. That's at least like one argument, but like Morten says, like I can't use anything but vanilla if I'm teaching it as well.
Yeah, I think even, correct me if I'm wrong here, but even if you switch to the industry standard keyboard shortcut thing, I mean, you still suffer from the same problem that
Yes.
you have to remember a crap ton of hotkeys, right? It's not like you don't have marking menus like or pie menus with Modo or Maya, for example. Everything is still hotkey based. So the root of the issue there is still, I mean, it's not a problem for someone working professionally and using it every single day. You just keep trucking on because you use it so much that there's never really any knowledge that's going to get lost. But for people who do a lot of different things and might not use it all the time, it can be a little bit difficult.
Yeah, I think it's harming adoption of the software. And yeah, you do technically have everything in the interface, but you're not going to go through the interface for it. Like I think Maya, like people don't really like Maya, and rightfully so, right? It's an old clunky software, but I actually think the interface here is quite nice in the sense that once you understand it, it's quite easy to understand. It's not nice in the sense that it's beautiful. It's not beautiful, but I think it's highly functional. Like if you want to use shelves, you just put all your tools on a shelf. If you want to, like all the tools are going to be in the menus as well, and there are a lot of plugins integrated, which definitely creates some confusion, and there are some modeling toolkit things that's not like super intuitive in terms of how it's integrated. But like in general, the Maya interface or the Maya UX is actually quite pleasant once you understand it. And hate coming in 3, 2, 1.
No, we're beyond that now. It's I think we took the brunt of the Blender hate when we actually started using Blender and making YouTube videos on it.
Yeah.
I feel like at this point, it's not that we've been accepted into the Blender community, but they tolerate us.
The Blender community is so interesting because like it's like the most helpful community I've ever had. If I have Maya issues, it might take like a few hours to get help. But if I have Blender issues, I just post on Twitter and instantly there are some solutions to it.
But it's not always the solution that you
asking
for.
Yeah, often it's like, how do I do X? Well, you can do Z instead. No, but I know exactly what I want to do. I just don't know. Like I know enough about 3D to know what I want to do. How do I do subsurface? You can just try transparent shader. Yeah, but I want to do subsurface, right?
I think my favorite one has to do with light linking.
Oh yeah,
that's my favorite one. Whenever you bring up light linking with anyone that's used Blender for an extended period of time, and I'm assuming who hasn't worked professionally doing lighting, the answer you get back is always like, why would you want a light link? That's not realistic at all.
Yeah. No, so what is light linking, Morten? For people.
So light linking, for those who don't know, is extremely helpful when you're lighting a character or a scene. Is where you can take one light, for example, and say this light should only hit one object, or it should hit everything but one object, right? So you can really customize the way that light hit certain objects in the scene. Like say you have 3 characters on screen at one point, but you really want to add a little bit of rim light to just one of the characters without that light affecting the other 2. Sure, it's not very realistic, but you do this all the time in production because you're not going for something to be 100% realistic. That's not the point of film or games. You're trying to art direct every single shot, every single character. That's where light linking is super powerful. It's a discussion we've had with multiple people at this point in the Blender community that still don't seem to understand why it's a helpful thing. I think mostly because it's not realistic, I guess.
Doing a product shot without light linking is a real pain. Doing a character can be alright, because often that's a bit more homogeneous, but if you're doing a product shot, you might need to have specific reflections in one specific area, because it's so goddamn clean. Like, you really just need to remove reflections in a certain area, and then light linking is fantastic. But if you don't have that, you end up like all these hacks. Like, even light linking basically exists on set as well, like physical sets, because you have people there with like they will like cut holes out of cardboard boxes or different things just to direct the light, and you can of course do that in Blender as well, but just light linking would be great to have.
I mean, my workaround for not having light linking in Blender now is taking a plane, throwing on a emission shader, setting it to black, and then making sure that the plane doesn't, you have that button where you can like click it so it doesn't show up in camera in the render. That way it blocks light, but it doesn't show up in your render, but it still blocks the light. The annoying thing there is you have to sit and almost like sculpt perfect shapes in order to guide the light. Whereas if you just had light linking, it's like one click and you would be done.
Yep. Very frustrating. But overall, Blender is fantastic for that. I love GPU rendering in Blender. It's so fast. Like when we rendered the trailer for the Ben Earth course, we both just like rendered them on both our computers, and it's really fast if you have a decent GPU.
Yeah.
Full frame for that was like a minute or something, minute and a half. It's really not like a crazy thing.
Insanely fast. Our fellow person who is living in Fukuoka was just talking about Nikolai Nadenov and him having great tutorials. So I just wanted to, here's a link to the store. Nikolai has, I mean, hands down, some of the best character courses out there right now. And he's just a phenomenal teacher. The way that he teaches is enjoyable. He's funny. And even though they're long courses, like, you don't get bored listening to him speak. He always has something to talk about and interesting things to tell about the character, his work, his life, whatever it may be. So I would really recommend checking out his products. And they're 50% off.
We've learned a lot from Nico as well. Like, we modified our way of making tutorials based on his. One of the things he was really good at is all real time, and he talks through it all, and then he has his face there as well. You can see, obviously we have cameras now as well, so we tried to do the same. We haven't recorded a tutorial yet. No, you did for your latest one, right? Your Dark Souls one?
I did.
Yeah, your face is in there. I think mine is going to be in the same one in the future courses as well. So
it's
we really
a pain in the
lot.
ass compared to not having your face there. But at the time, I was also using just a separate camera. Now we have a webcam, we can hook it up to OBS. The recording is going to be much nicer.
I think there was just another question from our fellow Fukuoka resident there before about something about the animation workshop. We can just, I can't find the question now, but we can just quickly talk about that. Like, that was a school that we both Morten and I attended in Denmark. We graduated a long time ago now, like 2014. It's way too long ago. It's like 8 years ago now. But it's a great school. It's a very affordable school. Now, they've had a change of management since we went there, so we don't know exactly what the school is like now, but definitely worth checking out. It's you've generally had a lot of really good professionals coming there to teach. But different now during COVID and not post-COVID, but at least semi post-COVID, hopefully. That it's been hard to get teachers there. That's something in general you need to just check out whenever you find a school. Just make sure that the teachers are legit and they know what they're talking about. Animation Workshop has been really solid there, and both Morten and I have gone back to teach there. At some
Yeah,
point in
the
2018.
only thing, I guess,
Oh, go on.
sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna say that the only thing there that I can remember recent times is the whole permanent staff that they started to introduce. I'm not quite sure how that's working now, but that was at least one of the great things about the school before was the non-permanent staff, that you constantly had new teachers. It's one of the things I really loved about it.
Yeah, in 2018, both Morten and I actually went there to teach. We taught the same course. So it was like a creature course just with Morten and myself for like 2 weeks. It was a lot of fun. Just like doing demos and going around to the students. Just like 25 students in the class. Our little demon dude now, whatever he is starting to come back to life. This is just me freestyling. Tons of stuff doesn't make any kind of sense here, but I'm just trying to get appealing shapes. And still Dynamesh is around 1.6 million polys now, and just going through.
We have Christian is saying that I think it's the animation workshop is free now.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, because the
I think
materials
that's because
fee.
they found out that it was illegal to charge the materials fees.
Yeah, that's true.
That's nice.
Yeah, that's really nice. I wish we could get that money back. But because a lot of the students got their money back because of that. But we're too old now for that, I suppose.
Damn it.
Yeah, I know.
I'm probably gonna have to skip in a couple minutes because I have no heating. I'm sitting upstairs and there's no heating up here. So I have a sheepskin on the floor to try and keep my feet warm, and like heating my hands on my phone. It's like I'm living in like the Middle Ages right now. I have this hyper advanced setup with 3 screens, a MacBook, a light, and a webcam, but I can't get heating.
So the heating in the house now comes from the webcam and the lights. Yeah, if you wanna pop out, I'm just gonna continue. We've been going for about 2 hours now. I'm just gonna continue by myself for maybe like half an hour more if you have to heat up.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Yeah, I'll do that. Once again, it was a lot of fun. Both of us will be back tomorrow. I think I will do some sculpting tomorrow. Yeah. Maybe I'll actually do a Krogan or something, or cool. I'll have a look at some other Mass Effect stuff. That's always good to take inspiration from. It's been a while since I've actually done any sculpting, so let's see how that turns out.
I think it's gonna be all right.
Probably. All right.
Yeah. All right, everyone. And now it's only us. Morten is now left. We are. I'm just going to continue this. Just going to look at the chat, which means the sculpting quality is going to deteriorate fast because it's significantly hard to sculpt and talk at the same time. So yeah, if you guys have any kind of questions about anything really, like if you have any CG questions, career questions about schools, education. It's been a while since I went on an educational rant, so that might be fun as well if there are any questions about that. So I'm just evaluating the character now as well. Like what I'm trying to do unsuccessfully now is I'm trying to make the silhouette nice. Like you can go up here as well and see the silhouette view. The reason I say unsuccessful is because it's too simple. Like, well, I'm evaluating successful. I'm seeing tons of mistakes. So for instance, what you can see, this is just one shape like so, though it's broken up, which is quite nice. And then it goes down and it's just straight. This is quite nice and say what's going on here. But it's this part here is just way too clean. Like it basically just simplified. It's just this shape here. So I want to try to find some ways to break it up. Maybe the mouth goes in like so, and then there's a nose to it or something like that. So I'm not entirely sure, but I'll try to like move it up. I'll try to like just experiment. When it comes to experimenting, don't be afraid of messing stuff up. Like here, for instance, it's really tempting to not do too big changes because of the teeth. Well, in this case, just like bash it up, see what happens. We can always reposition it. It's really important that you're not afraid of that. Do this with symmetry as well. Have you ever attended any other schools other than the animation workshop? What was the first place to study 3D? Yeah, we straight up, like both Morten and I, we've only attended the animation workshop. No other education, formal education apart from that. Even there, like we already, both Morten and I, we were pretty fortunate position because we already been doing 3D for quite a few years. So both of us, we spent quite a lot of time just on the on like drawing and painting. I spent basically my entire first year just on life drawing, and I know Morten spent like the remaining half of his education or so just on painting, like straight up just like digital painting, which is really cool. So you can learn a lot there. But one thing though about like I want to talk to you about sculpting in schools, character art, particularly about schools, is there aren't really going to be schools that are going to teach you proper character art. There are going to be some here and there, maybe like the Norman workshop and such, but like universities and such, they're not going to teach you sculpting. And the reasons for that is there's just too much stuff to learn when you're going through university, and schools they just have a finite amount of time and they just want to give you a general education. But it's also because in order to teach you character art like that, you just have to be a bit of a specialist at it. It's legit really, really hard to teach somebody how to sculpt. So chances are that the teacher you have at university is just not going to know how to do it, like of no fault of their own. If they come from like a material background or a texture paint background or lighting or comp, or maybe they don't have a professional background at all, they're just not going to have expertise within character art. So essentially, if you're looking to become a character artist, you will 100% need to supplement your education with courses. And like, I'm not gonna shill any courses now. You all know where you can find the courses. But basically, you just need to get courses from external sources, because the schools are not gonna be able to do that. Like Morten and I went to a pretty good school, and we basically had one character modeler at like throughout the whole course who was actually teaching us, maybe 2 or something. But it was really not a lot. And that's just going to be the reality for nearly every single school. If you have a school that it has a character artist teacher, that's going to be very rare, and you're going to be very fortunate to have that. But the good news is that, you know, is through like YouTube, like with FlippedNormals, what we have here, and through like the courses we have, you're legit going to get a proper university education, or, you know, something better than that in terms of pure character art, because of the knowledge that's available there. Okay, I can see has some questions now. Okay, here is a good question. What was a good, let's just scroll up a little bit, from Sculpted Stash. What is the best path to become a character or creature artist if you have no experience? Portfolio is first, but do you have some, but how do you leverage a good portfolio into a career? So, 2 parts. This is going to sound simple, but trust me, there's some point to this. 1, you have to be, in order to get a job, there are 2 steps. 1 is you have to be good enough to get the job. So this is just like skills. You just straight up just need to be good enough to get the job. And this obviously moves into like a bunch of different fields. Like you have to show topology, character sculpting, all that kind of stuff. And then the second part is you have to show that you're good enough. So this is like show or like portfolio. And each one of these will break down into multiple parts. So in skills, for instance, you just straight up need to have the skills. If you only have one of these, you're not going to go anywhere. So if you have the skills, but you can't prove it, you're not going to get a job, because people are not going to trust you to do the job. So in that case, if you have the skills, you have to build a portfolio. If you don't have the skills, but you're trying to show that you have the skills, you're going to build a portfolio and it's going to be lacking. So this means that you have to have both of these ones. So when it comes to skills, first, what does that mean? Well, you need to have you need to figure out what kind of job you want, because if you don't know what kind of job you want, you cannot figure out what kind of skills you want. Skills is not like a objective measure that you're just a good 3D artist. Depends 100% on what you want to do. The skills for an environmental artist is going to be very different than a CG art, or like a character artist, or like an effects artist, or anything like that. So first, figure out what you want to do. Figure out what the skills of a new graduate actually is like, and then build towards that. That's going to take a long time. And probably one of the best ways to do that in terms of character is going to be to study figure sculpting. Just straight up try to figure that out. Do tons of figure sculpting. So one of the best resources we have for that is going to be Introduction to Sculpting, which is going to be the dwarf dude we have down here somewhere. Man, we made a lot of courses over the last year. So indoor sculpting is going to be this guy here. So this covers a lot of different things. You basically have to know what's in this course. You don't have to take this course, but you need to know the concepts of it, like gesture and appeal and frequencies and anatomy and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to post a link to that in the chat. But then once you got the skills, then you have to show that you have the skills. And that includes, well, first you have to build an actual portfolio. You need to figure out what's going to be in the portfolio. The way you figure out what's going to be in a portfolio is not just by putting your finger up in the air and seeing what way the wind blows. You need to ask people who works in the field that you're currently applying for. If you want to be a character artist there, you need to ask character artists who are currently working in the field. You need to figure out exactly what is required, because if you don't, you're going to build the wrong thing. So figure out exactly what you need to have, and then you build that. This is how I did it when I was getting into my job in London. I asked a few people who were working in the field, specifically, what do you guys want to see when you're recruiting? And they were like, well, some photogrammetry is useful, figure sculpting is useful, maybe an original character design and anatomy. All right, cool. I'll do that. I'll do all those things. And they basically give me a shopping list. Just build these things. And then once you build those things, also like taking a step back here, before you do that, you need to make sure that you build only what's required. What a lot of people do, they do it in a wrong way. They build like 15 different projects and then they pick out the best and then they put that in a portfolio. Don't do that. Instead, figure out what you want in your portfolio and build only that. It takes a long time to build a successful portfolio piece. So really try to figure out what you want in your portfolio and build exactly that piece. This piece is not like a creative outlet or just necessarily showing what you want to do. This is like, okay, the job description says I need to show these skills. By doing this, by doing these pieces, you're showing that you have these skills. You're being smart about it. And then you have to present them beautifully. And then, of course, you need to keep it simple. For instance, just use an ArtStation. Totally fine just to have an ArtStation. You can, of course, have a custom website, but honestly, the problem with a custom website is you're probably going to mess it up. You're probably going to overcomplicate it, or you're going to forget to renew the domain, or it's just not going to look very nice. But if you have something like an ArtStation, it's just going to be dead simple. It's just very simple for people to find your contact info, and they know how it works. And then on top of that, you need your contact info. Your contact info needs to be available. Put it into every single image, every single page. Just make it as easy as possible for people to actually find you. So I mean, that's basically like a long way of saying how you get a job. First, get good. And then to show that you have skills. So these are the two things. It's simple. It's not easy. It's simple in the sense that you have to get the skills and then you have to show off that you have those skills. But really, like, what the top thing here is, a top piece of advice is talk to people who work in the industry. Get honest feedback from them, like pay them for it if you have to. Really, if you are not getting professional advice, your teachers does not count here. You need professional advice. Important thing, not because your teacher is bad, but because you need somebody who is working in the field actively. If you're not getting professional advice like that, you're flying blind. If you have somebody who, let's say you have two people who are identical, one person is, they both have the same skills, but one person keeps talking to professionals and the other one doesn't. The person who is talking to professionals has a much, much higher chance of getting a job than the person who does not. Any tips for starting portfolio pieces? Do you think time should be spent making a design document or plan, or just jump into PureRef? Honestly, if you're doing for a portfolio piece, like if you're doing a character model for a portfolio piece, use somebody else's concept. Don't try to concept this up yourself unless you want to be a concept artist. The reason for this is that most likely you're going to mess it up. This is like, obviously this varies, it's more generic advice, but for the vast majority of people, doing your own concept is a terrible idea, at least compared to using somebody else's design. Again, this is not about what you think is fun and all, that you're building a professional level portfolio. So the first thing I would recommend is, unless you're really good at your own concepts, and don't take your own word for that, get somebody professional to evaluate that. You do not have the skills as a student to evaluate if you're good enough at that. Get somebody professional to evaluate it. And then find a concept, and then find as much reference to support that as possible, and just chuck it into PureRef, and then you can start to block it in. If you're building for a portfolio, I recommend using a pre-made base mesh for that, and then just get up to a good spot. If you want to show topology for that, you might want to retopologize it yourself, just so you can show that you have those skills. But at least make sure that you focus on making this piece as good as possible. Don't necessarily start from a sphere. If I was doing it here for a portfolio piece, I would 100% start with a base mesh. It's just going to be so much easier, or some kind of like VDM brushes and that kind of stuff. Let's see if there are any more questions here. What do you think is easier, to get a job doing a realistic characters or stylized characters? Whew. Tricky one. Both really hard. You have to be at a decent level for both of them. I honestly don't know. They're quite different for just really different fields. Basically, I don't think any one of them is necessarily easier or harder. You have to have a significant amount of skill in either of them, meaning that you have to spend a lot of time on either one of them, and then you just have to build towards that. I don't think you should pick going into realistic or stylized based on how hard it is. You should pick what you enjoy doing. For instance, if you really enjoy doing stylized, I think you should go into stylized and then just go for it, and vice versa as well. For me, I gravitate much more towards realism. I find that to be much more fun than doing stylized work. But yeah, both really hard. It's not like it's easier to get into rotoscoping or like character art, which is one is objectively easier. Like it's a tricky one to answer. I'm in the game industry as a 3D artist and I'm thinking about moving to the VFX movie industry. How much worth does my experience within games have when applying? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be worth a lot in the sense that you know how to work in a production and a collaborative team and all that. Like compared to somebody who's just fresh out of uni, you're going to be probably a lot more mature in the sense that you've done this kind of stuff before. But something you have to just be sure of is that you're not like overly optimizing things, like that you can actually deliver the quality you're looking for. There is quite a significant difference from games to film when it comes to the actual quality bar, in the sense that it's just stuff is just a lot more polished and high res. You don't spend time optimizing things. You spend time really just like polishing it up. Like even like high-end game models, they're still not to the level of a high-end film model. So just be sure that you're not over optimizing anything. If you know how to bake maps and all that kind of stuff, that kind of stuff is not a particularly relevant skill for film. It might be handy here and there, but you just have to be sure that you can meet the quality for it. So just be sure to, again, contact professionals in the field you want to go into. If it's animation or effects or whatever it is, just get proper feedback on that, and yeah, just go for that. Something I want to talk to you guys about as well regarding feedback. Don't trust social media to validate your skills. I've seen this a lot where you, like even for myself as well, I would post pieces like, this is 2013-14, where I would build my portfolio to get into VFX. I would post pieces and people would be like, yeah, awesome stuff, I really like this piece. And then I would send these people a private email and just being like, hey, thank you for the kind words. Do you have any like in-depth feedback for it? Because I'm actually trying to get a professional job. And then they would be like, all right, gloves off. This is what I actually think. So what they would say publicly on Twitter was very different from what they would say privately. I mean, they were nice people, like no doubt. They helped me tremendously. And this is not like to bash anyone like that. It's more just don't trust validation on social media. I've seen this as well, where you have people who have like 200 followers and they have some of the best character art I've ever seen. They might be students. And then you have somebody with like 80,000. I saw somebody recently on Instagram which I think had something like 80,000 followers, and the drawings were really like they were just straight flat out not good drawings. They were something you expect after somebody's been drawing for like 2 months. And that person probably is not going to improve a whole lot because they keep being validated all the time by social media that, oh, what you're doing is fantastic. When it's really not, in the sense that if it's a hobby, sure, go for it. But if you're doing it, if you want to get professional level feedback on it, you have to just seek people's advice. And honestly, paying for that advice is not a bad idea. If it's like, if you're talking to a like, let's say you want to go into environments and you find a really good environmental artist on Instagram maybe Instagram or ArtStation, and you're like, I'll pay you like $200 for an hour of your time. Just give me some proper feedback on this. That money is going to be worth it so many times over, just because you're going to be able to avoid making mistakes. You might save 6 months of time just by knowing what you should build and what you should not build. How crucial is knowing hard surface modeling for a character artist? Like modeling toasters when you're applying for a job creating animals. It's not like you need to be able to show that you know how to make a toaster, but you need to be able to make a toaster, because that is just like a core skill. It basically, like something that's happened a lot of the last years, maybe 10 years or so, is that sculpting got a lot easier to do. So it means it got a lot easier to make characters. The barrier of entry got significantly reduced. And what you're seeing now is you have a lot of people applying for jobs, and they have pretty cool sculpts. They're what Morten and I have been calling like ZBrush cowboys for years, right? And these people are the ones who will do everything within ZBrush. And that's great. But the problem is that in a production, it's much more technical than just, can you output a cool OBJ for me? It's a lot more to do with topology and UVs and all that, and then you have to teach them how to do that, and that is honestly pretty tricky. So you need to ensure the recruiter or the supervisor who's evaluating your portfolio that you're not just a ZBrush cowboy, that you actually have more marketable skills as well, or more like hard skills, I would suppose, more like production skills. Because otherwise you might end up you might be in a spot where you can sculpt brilliant stuff, and then you're like, hey, can you change the vertex order on this? And you have no idea what on earth they're talking about, and then you're just stuck. And that's gonna be pretty detrimental to you, and it's gonna be very frustrating for the production as well. Justin is saying that, hey, this is the first time I've actually caught you live. Can't pass up the chance to tell you I love your videos and all that you guys do. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that, Justin. We're going to be streaming all week now. We're doing our Black Friday sale, and we're going to be streaming the entire week, which is going to be really cool. Also, just a quick reminder that we do indeed have our Black Friday sale, and nearly all products on FlippedNormals are now 20% off, including like the Ben Aird course, the Realistic Porter Masterclass. So you can learn how to do all this kind of juicy stuff. This is the course I recently made. This is like 21 hours long, almost 20 hours and 50 minutes. We just go through how to do this like step by step. So yeah, 50% off. Really, really solid masterclass. At least I think so. It's all real time, going through everything step by step. Jumping back into ZBrush, which is here. Does age and job experience outside of 3D matter a lot when applying for jobs? I mean, if anything, it's going to have a positive impact on it. You're not going to be discriminated against. If you have an option between somebody who's like 31 years old versus somebody who is like 18 years old, and the skills are the same, I would choose the more mature person every single time, just because they've gone through it a lot of different times. I've seen this before. I met people who's progressed quite fast in their career in the film industry just because they've had a previous career. And it means that if you have somebody who's really young and they haven't really experienced professional feedback before, you don't really know exactly how they're going to handle it. A lot of them are going to be totally fine, but some of them might take it personally. But if you have somebody who's like particularly like you, who's been doing 8 years in the military, also, hey, by the way, then you're going to have an advantage there in you, in the sense of like discipline and knowing how to take and receive feedback, all that kind of stuff. You just got to know how to work within an organization. So it's absolutely not going to be negative, but ultimately it's down to the portfolio. That's one of the things that's quite beautiful about the industry, that somebody with great connections and a crap portfolio is not going to get a job if somebody if compared to somebody with no connections and a great portfolio. There are of course exceptions here, and nepotism will definitely happen, but overall it's much more about your skills than it is about your connections, which is fantastic, because I worked with people from all over the world. Some people coming from really really poor countries, and they really just want to escape, and they were able to do so just by, well, not just, but by being able to show that they can really contribute to game or film productions, which is awesome. Do you ever use layers when you're sculpting? Oh yeah, absolutely I do. I'm not using on this because this is still a work in progress. You can't use layers if you're gonna keep dynameshing it. But once I have I'm at my highest subdivision level, I'm using layers a lot. Here's a question. Hey Henning, I remember correctly you worked as a texture artist, right? Would like to know some tips for junior texture artists to make yourself valuable in a bigger studio. Yeah, I worked as both a sculptor and texture artist. I worked mostly on characters. I was at a little bit of a weird spot because I was kind of between the two. It's a little bit of a bridge between modeling and texturing, where I would do a lot of texturing, but I would also like do a lot of modeling as well. Some things I really recommend is, depending on what you want to do, like if you want to work on more with character texturing, then learn sculpting. That's going to be really valuable. There's so many times you just have to improve your sculpting, or you have to just go in and improve the sculpting. But learn modeling as well. You don't have to be an expert modeler, but learn enough so that you can, like you're asking specifically how to be more valuable in the studio, learn enough so that you can take a model, you can modify the model, and you can publish the model with the changes, and that you can do your own UVs. I've seen this a lot where you have texture artists who are really good at technical texturing, but if there was any kind of model change needed, you would have to go through a modeler, which is just annoying, right? So if you can do all that yourself, massive advantage. Also learn how to do like shading as well. A lot of people, they would only do like the technical texturing, meaning creating the maps, and then they will leave the look dev, the shading, to somebody else. I really recommend getting good at both things. Personally, for me, I don't really see it as texturing and look dev. I see it as a surfacing. You're just defining what the surface looks like. So that really helps. It also helps to learn Mari as well. Mari is still a fantastic tool. I know a lot of people only use Painter, but you're definitely going to have an edge as if you want to be a pure texture artist, if you know how to use Mari. Like with the node graph as well. Was he added not recently, but like a few years ago, like 2017, 18 or something. Quite a few years ago now. But that got really solid. So learn how to do that. It can also help to be able to author your own materials as well using Designer. Basically, learn a lot of different tools so that you can approach basically any kind of texturing job. It's not great if you lock yourself too much into one specific thing. So then, like if you want to do it for like film and commercials, like learn like how to look dev in Arnold or RenderMan or something like that. And also make sure to oh hey, Morten is back. Also be sure to use reference for everything whenever you're showing what you're showing your work in a production. Be sure to show your reference, because otherwise it's really hard to give feedback on it. So reference is essential. So yeah, those are some of the tips on texturing. I'll scream out if I find some more tips of those. How many different pieces should a person have in their portfolio before applying for a job? Yeah, like the wise person Morten said just before, that depends. You don't want to have too many pieces, because that means that you're going to be inefficient in making different pieces, or you're gonna spread yourself too thin. But you don't want to have too few pieces, because that means you're not going to be able to show all or see all you can do. I think something like between 3 and 5 pieces is good. Though if you have one fantastic piece, that's much better than having like 10 mediocre pieces. Basically, you want to be sure that every single piece is something that you can stand behind. You are going to be asked about every single piece, and you really want to be sure that you don't have anything there that is not up to the standard of what you can do today. Like this is something that happens a lot. You build your portfolio during school, you have 3 years, and you put stuff from the first year in a portfolio just to fill it up. And now you're being asked about this in an interview and be like, this is not up to the standard of what we need. And you're like, yeah, but it's old. Or cool, just cut it out. this is what I was talking about before as well. It's really valuable to get the opinion of a professional artist in here on your work, because that way they can do this review before you're face to face with a scary supervisor. So something like 3 to 5 pieces is great, and really, for the love of everything that's holy, plan the pieces out beforehand. What you want to do is you want to plan them out, not just in like getting a reference and such, but plan them out in a strategic sense, so that if you're, let's say you want to be an environmental artist, talk to an environmental artist and figure out specifically what kind of stuff should you do, and then you need to build basically what they're telling you. And this is because there are different skills you might want to show. Like what I'm saying now is like, I don't know specifically what they were required, but let's, for sake of argument, it might be you need some foliage, and you need to show that you can sculpt rocks, and you need to show that you know how to use like a world generator or whatever it's called. And just you need to show a breadth of skill. So be sure that each piece shows something different. For instance, if you're trying to sculpt you're trying to do a character portfolio, don't do like 5 guys like this. Don't do like 5 monster dudes like this, because they're basically the same. If you can do one, you can do 5. Try to do one that's like, maybe it's a quadruped, one that's more like this, one is a natural figure sculpt, and really just show that you know a bunch of different things. Do you think 3D or any kind of digital artist can work cross-country full-time, or only country-based work? Well, it depends what country you're in, because different rules based on different states and different countries. So it really just depends on that. Something you just have to be aware of, when probably the biggest thing there is going to be 2 things really. First, does the studio allow you to do work remotely? Then, if they do, you can probably work from anywhere in the country. But something you have to be aware of, which is the second thing, is the taxes. You just have to be sure that you're allowed from a tax point of view to work in a specific region. Just return. What should you do with Morten, Henning? Did you fire him? Yeah, no, he was not allowed in the stream anymore. No, he left. He'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow he's gonna do some more sculpting. Well, there's no more sculpting. He's gonna be sculpting this time, so that's gonna be really fun. I'm also thinking maybe one of these days I might switch to sculpting in Blender, which I think is gonna be a lot of fun. Okay, here's the interesting one. If you're into collectibles and figure statues, how much of the technical stuff in animation and game dev actually matters? Now, I'm going to caveat this with the fact that I've never done work like this, but there are a lot of fundamentals here that applies to everything. This is the same thing we talked about before. If you were here, basically, topology is all just an optimization tool. So what you're seeing is you're seeing like the wireframe around here, around this kind of stuff. It's all nice for deformation. Super useful for deformation. Completely pointless if you're doing stuff for miniatures, because you're not going to deform the miniatures. So just figure out what the output is. It's always like that with topology or technical things. Figure out what the output is and build it based on the output. So if you're working on collectibles or miniatures, then you should be able to figure out what the output is. Then what you would do is, let's say it's your first gig, you would contact the company you're working for and be like, hey, can you give me the last model somebody delivered? And then you look at that, and then you build your model up to that scope. Maybe the final thing there is just a cool model which has been decimated. If that's the case, awesome. So just figure that out. Basically, a lot of the optimization you're having in game dev and film, it's to make something run faster or for it to deform better. That is entirely pointless if it's a static thing that's going to be 3D printed. But you have to consider other things when it is 3D printed. So meaning that the best 3D printed model is probably going to be a rubbish VFX model, and the best VFX model might be a rubbish 3D printed model, at least without it being optimized for that or adapted to that. Here's a good one by Sculpted Stash. How do you learn proper edge flow for non-human or organic models? All the tutorials are on people and creatures. Well, actually, this year, I released a course which may be interesting to you. This is called Introduction to Modeling in Maya. Now, if you're not using Maya, totally fine. It's really not about modeling in Maya. It's really about modeling. This course here covers tons of various concepts for modeling, where like just gonna stop this one, where you at the end we model this one. Pretty simple camera, but using pretty industry standard techniques, where we just block in and you're left with a model that is pretty solid. But it's much more about that. It's about like generally how do you approach modeling. So it's not just about the topology. It's a bigger question than just the technical topology of a prop or something organic. It's about how do you approach something. So this course here is really solid for understanding how to do general modeling, not organic modeling. We have other courses for that, but just like general hard surface modeling. Yeah, Keith Parker is saying, I worked professionally for 2 years for a small studio until the entire team was canned. Now I realize everything is made. There is no portfolio worthy, starting from scratch. So painful. That sounds very frustrating, and I'm very sorry for that. That really doesn't sound like fun. But hopefully, what happened is, the whole thing we talked about beforehand, you have 2 stages. You need to get good, and then you have show your skills. And so hopefully, you've now got the skills required, and now you can build a portfolio. The hard thing is if you have to build both of them, which is where a lot of people need to work on. Like, it's just building your skills and then showing them off. If you already have the skills, then building a portfolio is more like labor. That's more like, it's going to take you like a few months to do, maybe 6 months to a year. But it's doable. All right, I'm going to actually subdivide this guy now. And then I'm just going to refine it. This is how I'm actually working. It's a really interesting way of working. You just subdivide it up to a certain level, and then you just start to refine it. This is where you really just have to go in and just refine the whole model. And then I tend to just work across the shape as well. Gotta say, significantly harder to talk and sculpt, and this was a lot easier when Morten was here. The moment Morten left, the sculpting difficulty increased by like 10. I'm also working entirely without symmetry now, which is a really interesting challenge. It's not like hard necessarily, it just takes longer to do. But yeah, we've been going for like 2.5 hours now, so I'm going to continue for a few minutes more, and then we'll stop for today, but we'll be back tomorrow. So if you have any like final questions or anything like that, or any product recommendations or anything, just scream out. Just as a reminder, we have the Black Friday sale is very much ongoing, with all the FlippedNormals exclusives being 50% off. Just going to send a link to that, and also nearly all other products on the marketplace. So tons of really, really cool products here. I can just talk briefly about some of them. Skin kit, awesome skin textures. Introduction to sculpting. A really cool, just a really cool course for learning how to get started with sculpting. Intro to ZBrush is for learning ZBrush. Intro to Maya is really getting started with Maya. Same with Painter as well. Intro to Painter is just about that, really learning everything you need to know about Painter. Back to ZBrush. Do you ever use CModeler? I know Morten uses CModeler a little bit. I personally never use CModeler. I find it to be a very clunky tool. And for like pure sculpting like this, I really don't find it to be useful. I prefer to just like input and export my models from Blender or Maya. I'm switching more and more to Blender recently, and honestly, one of the main reasons is it's just faster to load. Like, it just opens up in like 2 seconds. So weirdly enough, that has an impact on it. How do you retopo an inherently symmetrical model, like some mutant with 2 heads and 1 super large arm? You try to model it. First, you try to not. You'd really try to not have asymmetrical models. But if you do need to, try to keep it as symmetrical as possible. For instance, if one has a super large arm, try to retopologize it in a sense where one arm or the arms are symmetrical, and then you like use the same topology and you just transfer that to the bigger arm. If it has like 2 heads or like something is just inherently asymmetrical, you just got to do it. Honestly, there isn't really a secret to it. You just have to go in and just straight up just do it. You just need to go through and just do it by hand. There's no real secret to it. You just do one side at a time. Let's say these are completely asymmetrical. Then you do it here, you do this here, and you do this here as well, and you just connect it up. Really, really painful to work on asymmetrical models in production. So as much as possible, people try to avoid doing asymmetry in the models. Like if you were to do concept sculpting, you would cost a company a lot more money if you introduce asymmetrical models. So if you try to, like, if you're a concept sculptor and you show that to like an art director or like a client or something, and they really like it, that's problematic, because now you show them something that's just a lot more expensive to build. Do you have any tips for increasing observational skills when working from a concept? Observational skills are so important, and I find that to be one of the biggest things when it comes to observing things. One of the things that helps is to, let's say you had a concept over here. I'm just gonna like pretend this is now a concept and this is our model. So imagine this is just a picture. I'm trying to recreate this. What you can do is you can straight up draw in the various shapes. Let's say you have a shape here and you can draw this on top like so. Then you can draw this on top like so as well, because now you can really start to see it, because then every single line and shape is going to be accounted for. It's very easy to miss these kind of details, meaning that this is not going to look exactly the same as this, because you're just missing these kind of shapes. I do the same thing with reference as well. Just like looking at reference. There's so many videos we have where we're just like pointing at something and be like, this is cool, observe this. But you also need more than the concept as well. You need real world reference whenever you're working, because the reference is, or the concept is most likely going to be quite rough. So it's important to do that. But for instance here, if this again is our concept, and this is our model, then you just have to go in here and be like, okay, let's count the different things. Here, there's a tooth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you just have to go through and make sure all these things are in it. A way to do this, for instance, is to straight up overlay this over this. Like you just take a screenshot of it and you just take it into Photoshop and you just overlay the two so they're directly on top of each other, because then you can clearly see it. I found it to be useful as well when I do that, when I do the overlay, to, on my concept, draw on top of it, like straight up draw, like this is similar to what I did before, but I mean on a different layer. Draw on top of the whole thing and get all the major landmarks there. You do it by hand, spend 10 minutes on it. And then you hide the concept. So now you're left with only the colorful drawing on top of your model, because now you're going to see everything that's missing. Now everything that's important was in your drawing. Now you can just clearly see all of these kind of things. So that's a good way to increase observation when it comes to really sculpting. Let's see if there are any more questions here. Do you think that using a non-standard software like Blender might reduce the chances of getting hired? Like if you're working between a Maya guy and a Blender guy, it's not so much the Blender guy versus Maya guy. It's more what software is the company working with. If you have two people who are identical in every single way, but one uses Maya and one uses Blender, and the company is a Maya production, most likely you're going to have a much easier time getting hired using Maya. If it's an agnostic production, let's say you're a contractor for some kind of game dev company, and the only thing they care about, can you supply me with an FBX file? That's not going to matter whatsoever, because then it's just an exported file. But I think it's annoying when people are talking online about like it doesn't matter what you're using. It's all just down to your skills. It's really not. If you're working in, like, my background is VFX, but if you were to work in VFX animation, basically anything with a heavy pipeline, building stuff in Blender is not just as easy as, or using Blender production is not just as easy as, oh, but I'm just going to give you an FBX file at the end. The problem is, once you're working in a production, it's more complicated than simply, oh, just give me an FBX file. It might be the case that first you don't know if the workflow is established between whatever software it is and Blender. So let's say between Maya and Blender, it may not be a fully established workflow. Let's say you have to do a camera lineup. You have a prop and you have to line her up, or a character or something like that. Now in Maya, due to the custom scripts they have, everything is already set up for you. Easy peasy. You just click a button and everything is set up. But now in order for you to work in Blender, you're going to have to export everything out. You're going to have to figure out, link all the image planes, and that might take a long time. And it might break as well. So that's a problem. But there are tons of these general things that the model has been published and has some kind of like, it's called a primvar or basically a tag to it. And now you start to export it out and import back in again. You forget to add the primvar back. Now suddenly the visibility of an object is broken in a render, and that's all because you forgot to add it back again, and that would not be a problem if you used Maya. So basically it's a bigger question of which software is better. It's more a question of, do you fit into the production? Another problem as well is, of course, if let's say you're sick one day or you quit a company or something, now all your files are just blend files, and what if nobody on team knows how to use Blender? Now these files are just stuck. Of course people can open them, export them, but like it's just more annoying. I had this exact thing when I started working in the visual effects industry. It wasn't Blender at the time, but it was Modo. Modo was a hot thing, and it was a really, really fast software. It was much faster than Maya and Maya at the time at modeling. But all the pipeline things I talked about now, they were just really annoying. So you may also not be able to use your own custom add-ons. Who knows, right? It's a proprietary, or it's a production. It might be locked in. So you may not be able to bring files in there. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But basically, it's not a simple question of, is Blender, am I more employable with one or the other? Basically, if the production uses Blender or uses Maya, you're gonna most likely have a better chance with Maya. So I always recommend people, even if they've been, like I'm dealing with people in mentorship now who's been using Blender, I always do recommend them, just spend a bit of time learning Maya as well. You can build your portfolio with Blender, fine, but you need to just, once you're done with your portfolio, go absolutely ham on learning Maya. Just spend a few weeks to months getting to the point where you're now comfortable operating the software, because it will just be an inherent advantage in a production. All right, I think that's it for today. If you have any more questions, we're going to be around tomorrow as well. I'm very excited about more streaming this week. I'm really enjoying it. Like, to let you know what's going on with FlippedNormals and why Morten has been around so much, we are in the very last phase of rebuilding our entire website, FlippedNormals.com, and this has been a really challenging time for us. Like, it's been draining our resources in terms of like how much time we have for things. But now we are at the very, very last stages, which means we should be in a very good spot early next year, hopefully. So we should be able to create a lot more general content, a lot of courses, focusing a lot more on YouTube. So we're very excited about that. So yeah, thanks to everyone who stopped by. It's been a real pleasure. And speaking of tomorrow, you're more than welcome to joining in tomorrow as well. We're going to keep updating you on social media. So just keep your tabs out for that. It's probably going to start at the exact same time as today, which was probably around 2 o'clock UK time. So that's 2 p.m. GMT. So yeah, pleasure, and